The Philosophy of Martin Buber, by Martin Buber, quotes, "The Philosophy of Martin Buber explores the profound ideas and contributions of Martin Buber, focusing on his philosophy of dialogue and relationships. Central to Buber's thought is the idea of genuine human relationships, particularly the I-thou relationship, where people connect in meaningful, authentic ways, contrasting with I-it relationships, where others are treated as objects. The book delves into Buber's reflections on existence, religion, and ethics, examining how dialogue and encounter form the foundation of human life and spiritual connection. Buber's philosophy emphasizes that only through true, reciprocal relationships can individuals achieve fulfillment, both in their relationships with others and with the divine. His work has had a lasting influence on existentialism, theology, and social philosophy. Quote 1. "The essence of man is contained only in the community, in the unity of man and man, a unity which rests upon the reality of the difference between I and thou." This quote underscores the fundamental concept in Buber's philosophy, the I-thou relationship, which differs from an I-it relationship. It emphasizes that human essence and moral existence are not fully realized in isolation, but through genuine, reciprocal encounters with others. These encounters recognize the individuality of the other person while creating a meaningful connection, forming the true fabric of human experience and community. Quote 2. "Only what he calls a philosophy des Zwischen can rescue us from either the impasse of an individualism, which considers man solely in reference to himself, or the other impasse of a collectivism which has eyes only for society." This quote speaks to Buber's concept of the between, zwischen, or intersubjectivity, which provides a way out of extreme individualism and collectivism. Buber suggests that human connection happens not within the individual or society as a whole, but in the space between individuals during authentic encounters. These moments of genuine interaction restore a sense of humanity, avoiding the isolating pitfalls of focusing solely on the self, or losing oneself in the collective mass. Quote 3. "It is only when the individual recognizes the other in his very otherness, as a human being other than himself, and when on this basis he effects a penetration to the other, that he can break the circle of his solitude in a specific, transforming encounter." Here, Buber emphasizes the necessity of acknowledging the uniqueness of others in order to transcend isolation. Authentic connection occurs not when we subsume others under categories or treat them as objects, but when we engage with them as distinct individuals. Such encounters transform both the self and the other, breaking the cycle of solitude by fostering real understanding and human solidarity. Quote 4. "The fundamental datum of human existence is man with man." This quote captures Buber's central argument that human existence is defined by relationships. Human beings are not isolated entities, but find their meaning in connections with others. These relationships are not secondary aspects of life. Rather, they form the core of human existence. Buber stresses the idea that personal growth and fulfillment are contingent upon these interhuman encounters. Quote 5. "Love does not adhere, haftet nicht, to the I in such a fashion that the thou would be its content or object, for love is between I and thou." This quote illustrates Buber's distinction between love as an objectifying force and love as a dynamic relationship. In the I-thou relationship, love is not something one possesses or directs toward another person as an object. Instead, it exists in the interaction between individuals, where both maintain their integrity. This is a pure, reciprocal love that forms the foundation of human connection and communication. Quote 6. "Primary words do not signify things, but they intimate relations." Buber emphasizes that language does not merely describe objects, but points to the relationships between beings. In his philosophy, words like I and thou are not just terms for self and other, but convey a deeper sense of interaction and connection. The meaning of existence is found in these relational dynamics, not in isolated entities. The essence of life, according to Buber, is the dialogue and mutual recognition that occurs between beings. Quote 7. Let no attempt be made to sap the strength from the meaning of the relation. Relation is mutual. Here, Buber stresses that relationships are inherently reciprocal. In his famous I-thou dynamic, the interaction between two beings is not one-sided. Each influences and shapes the other. This mutual exchange is foundational to understanding human existence and the divine, as it captures the interdependence that defines authentic encounters. For Buber, even our relationship with God is not passive, but involves mutual engagement and responsiveness. Quote 8. We have, in an incomprehensible way, an effect upon God. This quote conveys Buber's radical idea that humans, through their actions and choices, impact God. This is part of his relational theology, where God is not a distant, immutable being, but one who is involved in a dynamic relationship with humanity. This view suggests that our lives contribute to the unfolding of divine reality, making human existence significant in the cosmic order and in shaping the divine destiny. Quote 9. The world is not divine sport, it is divine destiny. Buber insists that life is not a meaningless plaything in the hands of a distant deity, but rather it is part of a purposeful, divine plan. Humanity participates in this destiny through meaningful actions and relationships. Buber's view elevates human existence by suggesting that each person's life has a role in the divine narrative, making it an essential part of the world's spiritual evolution. Quote 10. The way to find God is to leave nothing behind, to include the whole world in the thou, to include nothing beside God, but everything in Him. Buber encourages an all-encompassing vision of God that does not reject the world but embraces it. This means recognizing the divine presence in everything and every relationship. Instead of withdrawing from life to seek God, Buber urges us to find the sacred within the very fabric of existence, in all our interactions with the world and other beings, thus turning every encounter into an encounter with the divine. Quote 11. God loves, which implies relativity or nothing, unsurpassably, perfectly, if you will absolutely, and He is absolutely or unsurpassably worthy of being loved. This quote illustrates the duality in the divine nature where God's love is both absolute and relative. God's love is absolute in its perfection, being unsurpassable, yet it implies a relational quality. God is not detached, but engages with the world and humanity in a dynamic relationship. This duality of love shows that God's perfection does not isolate Him from creation, but makes Him intimately connected with it, deserving of our love in return. Quote 12. The unlimited or absolutely infinite is totally lacking in beauty or goodness, and cannot be anything actual. Buber argues that for something to be truly beautiful or good, it must have form, limits, or determination. The purely infinite or unlimited lacks these qualities and therefore cannot possess beauty or goodness in actuality. This speaks to his broader philosophy that reality and value emerge through form and relationships, rather than through abstract, boundless concepts. To experience beauty or goodness, we must encounter it within the finite and determinate aspects of life. Quote 13. God's actual possession, or fullness of reality, must always, in every possible case, be inclusive of all that is actualized in that case in or by any being. This statement emphasizes the inclusive nature of God's reality. God's being is not isolated, but contains everything that exists or happens. In Buber's view, God is in constant relation with creation, encompassing all that occurs. This relationality extends to every creature and event, meaning that God's perfection lies in His ability to integrate all realities within Himself without diminishing His divine essence. Quote 14. It is not the absoluteness of God, but his relativity, which makes him for us the abysmal mystery. Buber suggests that the true mystery of God lies not in his absolute nature, but in his relational aspect, his relativity. God's interactions with humanity, his ability to be in relationship with us, is what makes him truly incomprehensible. This challenges the traditional notion of an impassive, detached God, presenting instead a divine being deeply involved in the fabric of existence, which is far more enigmatic and profound. Quote 15. The encountered divine reality is just that from which abstraction abstracts, for it is the concrete of concretes. Buber argues that divine reality cannot be fully grasped through abstract thought. It must be encountered directly. God's reality is the most concrete of all realities, and any attempt to understand it through mere abstraction diminishes its essence. This highlights Buber's focus on lived experience and encounter over theoretical speculation when it comes to the divine. Only through direct, personal experience can one truly perceive God's presence. Quote 16. For the notion of man, as in the first instance, a solitary ego, looks not to the fulfillment, but rather, in Buber's view, to the virtual nullification of man. This quote reflects Buber's rejection of the idea that man is fundamentally a solitary being. Buber believes that human existence is not realized in isolation, but through relationships with others. To view man as an isolated ego denies the essence of humanity, which is relational in nature. By engaging in meaningful interactions, individuals truly become human, while isolation leads to a diminished and incomplete existence. Quote 17. Only in our time has the anthropological problem reached maturity, that is, come to be recognized and treated as an independent philosophical problem. Buber argues that philosophical anthropology, the study of human nature, has only recently been treated as a distinct and mature philosophical concern. He attributes this development to the modern breakdown of traditional community structures and the subsequent need for individuals to reflect on their existence and relationships. The erosion of direct human connections in large, impersonal social forms has made the question of what it means to be human more urgent and complex. Quote 18. Even man's hunger is not an animal's hunger. This quote illustrates Buber's belief that human experiences, even basic needs like hunger, differ fundamentally from those of animals. Human life is marked by layers of meaning that transcend mere physical survival. Hunger, in Buber's view, is imbued with symbolic and relational significance because humans interpret and respond to their needs within the broader context of social and existential concerns. Quote 19. In order to stand in relationship to another, I must be myself, recognizing the other as a self too, and through such recognition I become more truly a self, not less so. Buber emphasizes that authentic relationships require the recognition of both one's own individuality and the individuality of others. True selfhood is not lost in relationships, but is actually enhanced. Through encountering and engaging with others as distinct individuals, we deepen our own identity and humanity, which contrasts with mysticism, where the self dissolves in union with a higher reality. Quote 20. We are created along with one another and directed to a life with one another. This quote highlights Buber's assertion that human beings are inherently relational. Our existence is not meant to be solitary. We are designed to live in community with others. Relationships are essential for fulfilling our human potential and for connecting with the divine. The path to God, according to Buber, lies in engaging with others, not withdrawing from them. Quote 21. Man, however, has the unique power of projecting his concern and his questioning beyond his realm of animal urgencies, and thus he not only reacts to his environment, but also, and more distinctively, he comes to orient his thought and actions with respect to an enduring world which comprehends and infinitely transcends his environment. Buber highlights the distinct nature of human consciousness. Unlike animals that react to their immediate surroundings based on biological needs, humans possess the ability to contemplate an enduring transcendent world. This capacity allows humans to go beyond mere survival and engage with questions of existence, meaning, and the broader universe. The human ability to reflect on and shape the world distinguishes mankind from other creatures, signifying a deeper engagement with life beyond the immediate environment. Quote 22. The process of distancing implies, as its complementary, the process of entering into relationship. The two processes are not to be regarded as successive in time. They imply each other mutually. Buber explains that the way humans perceive the world involves both separating themselves from it and simultaneously forming relationships with it. This distancing allows individuals to recognize the independence of others and the world, but at the same time, it creates the opportunity to enter into meaningful relationships. These two processes, distancing and relating, are not separate events, but are interconnected, forming the basis of human interaction and understanding of the world. Quote 23. It must be firmly maintained that the first creates the presupposition of the second, not its actuality, but its presupposition. Buber stresses that the act of distancing, where humans recognize the independence of the world and others, sets the stage for relationships to form. However, distancing alone does not create relationships. It merely creates the space for them to develop. Relationships require an additional step, a mutual engagement. This emphasizes that while recognizing otherness is essential, true connection requires effort beyond mere recognition. Quote 24. God, in short, is not he or she or it or they, but thou. This quote captures Buber's conception of God as a personal, relational being, rather than an abstract entity or object. The term thou signifies a direct, personal engagement with God, where God is encountered as a being with whom one has a relationship, rather than as an object to be studied or theorized about. Buber's emphasis on addressing God as thou highlights the mutual, intimate nature of the divine-human relationship. Quote 25. God not only creates man, but also sustains his existence at every moment, and such sustention can be considered a continuous and ever-present creation. Buber views the act of creation as ongoing, not confined to a single moment in the past. God's relationship with humanity is continuous, with each moment of existence representing a new act of creation. This ongoing creative process reflects the dynamic and living nature of the relationship between God and man, where every moment offers the potential for renewal and engagement with the divine. Quote 26. Responsibility presupposes one who addresses me primarily, that is, from a realm independent of myself, and to whom I am answerable. Buber explains that responsibility arises in the context of relationships, where one is called to respond to another being who exists independently of oneself. This dynamic of being addressed and having the obligation to respond is central to his concept of responsibility. It is not an abstract moral duty, but an inherent aspect of the mutual relationship between individuals, where each person is answerable to the other, creating a deeper sense of accountability grounded in the relational sphere. Quote 27. The I of the primary word, I, thou makes its appearance as person, and becomes conscious of itself as subjectivity. Buber highlights that self-awareness and personhood are realized through relationships. It is only in the encounter with the thou that the I emerges as a person, conscious of its own subjectivity. This means that individuality is not developed in isolation, but through meaningful interactions with others. The self becomes fully realized in the context of relationships, where it recognizes both its own identity and the identity of others. Quote 28. The very creation of the mutual contact between human beings presupposes a kind of instinct toward this creation, an instinct inherent in the human beings. This quote emphasizes that human relationships are not merely accidental, but are driven by an innate, fundamental instinct to connect. Buber suggests that mutuality and the establishment of relationships are not only outcomes of conscious effort, but are part of the inherent nature of human beings. This instinct makes the formation of relationships an essential part of what it means to be human, positioning connection as a core aspect of existence. Quote 29. In the beginning is relation as category of being, readiness, grasping form, mold for the soul. It is the a priori of relation, the inborn thou. Buber asserts that relationship precedes individuality, framing it as the foundational category of human existence. The inborn thou refers to the natural capacity humans have to engage with others. This suggests that humans are, by their very nature, relational beings. Relationships form the essential basis upon which individuals experience and understand themselves and the world around them, providing a mold for the soul's growth and connection with others. Quote 30. The inborn thou is realized in the lived relations with that which meets it. This quote highlights the idea that the innate capacity for relationships, the inborn thou, is actualized through concrete interactions with others. Human beings' relational nature is not abstract, but comes into reality through genuine encounters. It is through these lived experiences of meeting and interacting with others that the full potential of the relational self is realized, showing that relationships are the vital expression of human existence. Quote 31. God wants us to affirm the living creatures we are interwoven with, and not to renounce them. Buber argues that true engagement with God involves embracing and affirming the relationships with other living beings rather than withdrawing from them. He opposes any spiritual or religious path that leads to isolation from others, suggesting that to acknowledge God's creation, one must also recognize the importance of human relationships. This reflects his belief in the intrinsic value of dialogical encounters, where the connection with God is deepened through our connections with others, reinforcing a view that humanity and creation are interconnected in the divine plan. Quote 32. The dialogical situation is, as it were, the microcosmos of habitation within the cosmos in its totality. Buber sees the dialogical relationship as a miniature reflection of the larger cosmic order. Human interaction, for him, represents a way of situating oneself within the universe, allowing for a sense of belonging and purpose. By engaging with others in meaningful relationships, individuals participate in a larger cosmic harmony. This view emphasizes that human relationships are not isolated from the world, but are integral to understanding and inhabiting the universe meaningfully. Quote 33. The Hegelian house of the universe is admired, explained, and imitated, but it proves uninhabitable. Buber critiques philosophical systems like Hegel's, which he believes construct intellectual frameworks for understanding the universe, but fail to provide a way for people to truly live within them. He argues that while these systems may be impressive in theory, they do not address the actual lived experience of human beings. For Buber, philosophy must be rooted in real human encounters and relationships, rather than abstract thought alone. This quote highlights his preference for lived, relational experience over speculative or purely intellectual approaches to life. Quote 34. The separation between spirit and instincts, the separation found, according to his interpretation, both in Freud's psychology and Shaler's anthropology, only indicates a more fundamental separation, that between man and God, or man and the cosmos. Buber criticizes the modern tendency to divide human existence into separate realms, such as spirit and instincts, arguing that this fragmentation reflects deeper divisions between individuals, between humanity and God, and between humanity and the cosmos. He believes that these separations are symptomatic of a broader existential crisis in which modern people have lost their sense of wholeness and connection. For Buber, the solution lies in restoring these fundamental relationships through dialogical encounters that reunite the divided aspects of life. Quote 35. The present arises only in virtue of the fact that the thou becomes present. Buber emphasizes that the present moment gains its full meaning and reality only through the presence of the thou, the other person, or being with whom one is in relationship. It is through these encounters that time and existence become truly alive and significant. Without the presence of another, the present would lose its vitality, suggesting that meaningful life is always relational, and that the reality of time is tied to the depth of human connection. Quote 36. The I-thou relation consists in confronting a being external to oneself, i.e., one which is radically other, and to recognize it as such. This quote emphasizes that the essence of the I-thou relationship is recognizing and engaging with another being in its full otherness. Unlike the I-it relation, which objectifies the other, the I-thou relationship requires direct, genuine confrontation with the other as a unique entity. This interaction is not based on conceptualization or perception, but on an immediate personal encounter where the other is acknowledged in its full distinctiveness. Such recognition fosters a deep and meaningful connection that transcends objectification. Quote 37. The interval between the I and thou, the Zwischen, is the locus where being is being realized. Buber describes the space between individuals, the Zwischen, as the place where true being is brought into existence. It is within this relational space, formed through genuine encounters, that the essence of being is realized. The meeting between the I and thou is not merely an interaction, but the actualization of existence itself. This notion places profound importance on relationships, suggesting that the realization of being happens in the dynamic and ever-changing space between individuals. Quote 38. Man can become whole, not by virtue of a relation to himself, but only by virtue of a relation to another self. This quote highlights Buber's belief that personal wholeness is achieved not through self-reflection or isolation, but through relationships with others. It is only in engaging with another person, recognizing them as a thou, that one becomes fully human. Self-knowledge and self-realization are incomplete in isolation. They require the presence and interaction with others to become meaningful and whole. Quote 39. Responsibility, in the etymological sense of the term, not the mere exchange of words, is what is meant by dialogue, and it is only in the former case that there is meeting. Buber stresses that true dialogue goes beyond mere words. It involves a deep sense of responsibility toward the other. In real dialogue, one does not just communicate, but also acknowledges their responsibility in the relationship. This sense of accountability creates a genuine meeting between individuals, fully present and responsive to each other. Without this responsibility, dialogue remains superficial, and the meeting of souls cannot occur. Quote 40. Commitment is a strictly personal relation. Truth does not consist in a reflection on that commitment, but is the commitment itself. Here, Buber asserts that truth is not found in thinking about or analyzing commitment, but in the act of commitment itself. It is through personal engagement and dedication in relationships that truth is realized. Truth is not something abstract to be contemplated. It is embodied in the active, lived commitment to another person. This understanding of truth emphasizes action and personal involvement, rather than detached observation. Quote 41. The I in its relation with the thou is further related to itself by means of the thou, i.e., it is related to the thou as to someone who in turn relates itself to the I, as though it had come into delicate contact with himself through the skin of the thou. This quote illustrates the reciprocal nature of the I-thou relationship in Buber's philosophy. In this relationship, the I becomes aware of itself through the thou. The other person, the thou, is not just a separate entity, but reflects back a sense of self, making the I more aware of itself. This delicate exchange means that true self-awareness is only achieved through a relationship with another, where both individuals engage and recognize each other's distinctiveness. Quote 42. Truth does not consist in a correspondence with being, but is the correlate of a life authentically lived. Buber challenges the traditional idea that truth is simply about aligning thoughts with reality. Instead, truth is found in living an authentic life. This means that truth is not something external or static, but emerges from one's genuine and responsible engagement with life. The truth of a person's existence is realized through how sincerely they live and interact with the world and others, making truth an active, lived experience rather than a mere intellectual alignment. Quote 43. Between the I and the thou, there is no conceptual structure, no prediction, fantasy, purpose, desire, or anticipation. All intermediaries are obstacles. This quote emphasizes the purity and immediacy of the I-thou relationship. Buber believes that in a genuine encounter, there should be no preconceived ideas, desires, or expectations that distort the interaction. These intermediaries act as barriers that prevent true connection. The meeting of I and thou must be free of such constructs, allowing for a direct and unmediated engagement where both individuals are fully present with each other in the moment. Quote 44. The I-thou relation is nothing but a realization of the meeting. The thou has no qualities which the I aspires to have or know. Here, Buber asserts that the I-thou relationship is purely about the act of meeting itself, and not about the qualities or attributes of the thou. In this relationship, the I is not seeking to gain something from the thou, such as knowledge or possession. Instead, the relationship is about mutual presence and engagement. The value of the thou lies in the encounter, not in what the I can learn or obtain from it, maintaining the integrity of the other without turning it into an object of desire or use. Quote 45. The meeting is also construed as a relation with God, as well as with things. Buber extends the I-thou relationship beyond human beings, suggesting that one can also enter into this deep, meaningful relationship with God and even with objects. This means that the principle of direct, unmediated engagement can apply to all aspects of existence. The recognition of the presence and significance of the other, whether human, divine, or material, is what constitutes the meeting, allowing for a profound connection with the world as a whole. Quote 46. We find the ethical in its purity only there where the human person confronts himself with his own potentiality and distinguishes and decides in this confrontation without asking anything other than what is right and what is wrong in this his own situation. Buber asserts that true ethical action arises from an individual's direct confrontation with their own potential and the moral demands of a given situation. Ethical decisions are made not by adhering to external expectations or societal norms, but by considering what is intrinsically right or wrong in the specific context. This personal confrontation with moral choices reflects the depth of human responsibility and the seriousness of ethical life. Quote 47. Revelation transforms man by introducing into his being new dimensions of insight and awareness. It is in the meeting with the eternal thou that man becomes what he is. Here alone does man become truly human. This quote highlights Buber's belief in the transformative power of revelation. When a person encounters the eternal thou, God, they gain new insights and awareness that fundamentally change their being. For Buber, such a revelation is not just a passive experience, but an active encounter that shapes one's humanity, helping the individual to realize their true potential and moral responsibilities. It is through this divine meeting that a person fully becomes human. Quote 48. No act can be right, Buber teaches us, unless it arises from our bond with God. No act can be morally significant unless it is linked to God. Buber stresses that the moral significance of any action comes from its connection to God. Without this bond, actions lose their deeper ethical meaning. For Buber, it is not enough to follow moral rules or act out of personal conviction. True morality arises when actions are guided by a direct relationship with the divine. This bond with God is the source of moral authority and the basis for making right decisions. Quote 49. Every moral decision is a moral risk, because there are no final answers available to us. Yet we have no choice but to take the chance, else we reduce ourselves to mechanical automata and destroy our humanity. This quote reflects Buber's view that moral decisions are inherently uncertain and risky, but this very uncertainty is what keeps us human. He stresses that while there are no definitive answers in ethical dilemmas, the act of making a choice is essential to maintaining our human essence. Avoiding this responsibility by adhering to rigid, predetermined rules dehumanizes individuals, turning them into automatons devoid of personal moral engagement. Quote 50. Buber believes that moral values must be absolute and must be related to an absolute, else they cannot be binding at all. Buber argues that true moral values cannot be relative or subjective. They must be connected to an absolute authority, such as God. Without this link to an absolute, moral values lose their binding nature and become mere preferences or conventions. Buber suggests that only through the existence of an absolute can individuals feel truly obligated to act morally, reinforcing the necessity of a higher, transcendent source for ethical guidance. Quote 51. I do not in the least mean that a man must fetch the answer alone and unadvised out of his breast. Nothing of the sort is meant. How should the direction of those at the head of any group not enter essentially into the substance out of which the decision is smelted? In this quote, Buber clarifies that moral decisions are not made in isolation. While individual responsibility is crucial, the guidance and wisdom of others, especially those in leadership or moral authority, play a role in shaping decisions. However, Buber cautions that such direction should not replace personal moral decision-making, emphasizing that ultimate responsibility still lies with the individual who must choose. Quote 52. In Revelation, Buber believes God distinguishes between truth and lies, righteousness and unrighteousness, and He challenges us to make such distinctions within the sphere of our life. Buber emphasizes that Revelation provides humanity with the divine capacity to discern between truth and falsehood, right and wrong. He believes that God not only makes these distinctions clear through revelation, but also challenges humans to apply this discernment in their lives. Thus, human beings are called upon to actively engage with these moral distinctions, guided by divine revelation as they navigate their ethical responsibilities. Quote 53. If violence is evil, then murder must surely be judged evil, and Buber does make precisely this judgment. Buber takes a firm stance on violence, categorically condemning it as evil. He extends this condemnation to murder, viewing it as the most extreme form of violence. For Buber, the inherent wrongness of violence and murder lies in their destructive nature, which contradicts the moral and ethical demands of living in harmony with others and respecting the sanctity of life. This position underscores his broader rejection of any actions that undermine human dignity and peace. Quote 54. The basis of man's life with man is twofold, and it is one: the wish of every man to be confirmed as what he is, even as what he can become, by men, and the innate capacity in man to confirm his fellow men in this way. This quote emphasizes Buber's belief that human relationships are grounded in the mutual need for confirmation. Every person desires to be recognized for who they are, and who they have the potential to become. At the same time, people have the capacity to offer this recognition to others. It is this reciprocal process of acknowledgement that forms the core of human existence, allowing individuals to grow and realize their full potential through meaningful relationships. Quote 55. Making the other present means to imagine quite concretely what another man is wishing, feeling, perceiving, and thinking. Buber defines making the other present as the act of fully understanding and imagining another person's inner experiences. This process is essential for genuine human connection, as it allows one to see the other not as an object, but as a self, with their own unique feelings and thoughts. Such empathy and presence create a deeper bond between individuals, enabling real dialogue and the possibility of authentic relationships. Quote 56. Dialogue not only means awareness of what addresses one, but responsibility. Responsibility for Buber means responding, hearing the unreduced claim of each particular hour in all its crudeness and disharmony, and answering it out of the depths of one's being. In this quote, Buber connects dialogue with responsibility. He argues that true dialogue involves not just awareness, but also a response that arises from one's entire being. This response must address the full reality of the situation, including its difficulties and complexities. Responsibility, therefore, is about engaging with life in a way that acknowledges the demands placed on the individual and answering those demands authentically and fully. Quote 57. The person who knows direction responds with the whole of his being to each new situation with no other preparation than his presence and his readiness to respond. Buber explains that a person who understands their purpose or direction in life approaches each new situation with their whole being, ready to respond. This readiness stems from a deep sense of presence and an openness to engage with whatever life presents. It is not about planning or premeditation, but about being fully present and responsive to the uniqueness of each moment, allowing one's true self to emerge through the interaction. Quote 58. Buber's philosophy of dialogue radically shifts the whole ground of ethical discussion by moving from the universal to the concrete, and from the past to the present. This quote highlights how Buber's philosophy transforms ethical thought. Instead of relying on abstract, universal principles, Buber focuses on the specific, concrete realities of individual situations. Ethics, in his view, are not about applying fixed rules from the past, but about responding to the present moment in a way that is deeply personal and contextually appropriate. This shift underscores the importance of direct, lived experience in moral decision-making. Quote 59. Guilt in this case is the product of not taking the direction toward God. But since the direction toward God is found in the meeting with what one encounters in each new hour, we can say at one and the same time that the guilty man is he who shuns the dialogue with God, and he who does not enter into the dialogue with man and the world. This quote highlights Buber's belief that guilt stems from failing to follow the direction toward God, which is realized through everyday encounters with others and the world. Avoiding meaningful relationships and failing to engage with both divine and human dialogues are acts that lead to guilt. In Buber's view, living authentically involves participating in these dialogues, as they guide one toward their true purpose and connection with God. Quote 60. Existential guilt occurs when someone injures an order of the human world, whose foundations he knows and recognizes as those of his own existence and of all common human existence. Buber explains existential guilt as the feeling that arises when one harms the shared moral and existential order that binds humanity. This guilt is not merely an internal feeling, but a recognition that the individual has violated a deeper, interhuman reality that connects all people. It reflects a failure to uphold one's responsibility to this communal structure, which is essential for genuine human existence. Quote 61. Reconciliation is only valid, he writes, if it happens out of the core of a transformed relationship to the world, a new service to the world with the renewed forces of the renewed man. Buber suggests that true reconciliation is not just about admitting guilt or wrongdoing, but about undergoing a deep personal transformation that leads to renewed commitment to the world. After recognizing one's guilt, the individual must change their relationship with the world and engage in acts of service. This renewed connection with the world, driven by a changed self, is essential for genuine reconciliation. Quote 62. Man is never guilty toward himself alone. He is always guilty toward other beings as well, toward the world, toward the being that exists over against him. Buber asserts that guilt is never an isolated experience between a person and their own conscience. It always involves others, whether other people, the world, or even the divine presence. Human actions have broader implications, and whenever someone acts wrongly, they are not only failing themselves, but also affecting the relationships and order that connect them to others and the world. Quote 63. Trust is trust that there is meaning in the world. It is trust in the world as a world of potential thou. In this quote, Buber emphasizes the importance of trust in the meaningfulness of the world and its relationships. He suggests that one must have faith that the world is filled with the possibility of encountering the thou, or meaningful relationships, even when these opportunities may not be immediately visible. Trust in existence and in the potential for meaningful connections is essential for living an authentic life. Quote 64. We do not have the word at our disposal. It disposes of us as the commandment of the hour, which is addressed to us and demands our response. Buber emphasizes the idea that we do not control or own language or religious truth. Rather, it commands us. This statement reflects his view that life's moments present us with demands or commandments, and our responsibility is to respond to them authentically. The dynamic nature of life requires us to continuously meet these challenges as they come, rather than shaping them to fit our own preconceived notions or desires. Quote 65. The continuity of the flow gives way to a discontinuity of meetings, which are not perhaps unrelated to one another, but in each of which the ever-moving wave rounds itself into the crystal globe of the fulfilled moment. Buber reflects on the idea that life is not a smooth, continuous flow, but a series of distinct encounters or moments of fulfillment. Each of these moments, though separate, has the potential to complete itself in a way that reveals meaning and purpose. These encounters, or meetings, provide the opportunity for deep connection and understanding, transforming the chaotic flow of life into meaningful experiences that shape our existence. Quote 66. The good for Buber is not an objective state of affairs or an inner feeling, but a type of relationship, the dialogue between man and between man and God. Buber defines the concept of good as something that exists in relationships rather than as an abstract principle or feeling. For him, goodness is found in the dialogue between individuals and between humans and God. It is through these interactions that the ethical and moral dimensions of life are realized. This view suggests that the quality of one's relationships, characterized by genuine dialogue and connection, is the foundation of moral goodness. Quote 67. The reality of religion is the act of proving true, tzedakah, in this coexistence and communication, thanks to which thinking becomes possible. This quote emphasizes Buber's idea that religion is not based on abstract doctrines, but is actualized through living and communicating in a truthful way. It is through the ethical actions of righteousness, tzedakah, within human relationships that real understanding and thinking emerge. Religion, for Buber, is lived through interactions that allow truth to be revealed in everyday life. Quote 68. The past becomes destiny, Schicksal, only as it is defined out of a sense for this sending, Schickung, and recorded, taken to heart, by the self, made its own, made a part of the present. Buber highlights the idea that the past does not determine one's fate unless it is consciously integrated into the present. It is through self-awareness and an active embrace of one's history that the past transforms into destiny. By internalizing and understanding past events, individuals can give meaning to them and allow these experiences to guide their current lives. Quote 69. Belonging together, even in polarity, that is the secret of existence, just as infinite nearness with infinite distance is the secret of the God who is addressed in the same blessing as Thou, my Lord, our God, King of the universe. In this quote, Buber captures the paradoxical nature of existence and the divine. The relationship between nearness and distance mirrors the way humans relate to God, intimately close, yet infinitely distant. This tension reflects the complexity of existence, where opposites coexist, and it is within this duality that one finds the secret of life and the mystery of God. Quote 70. The thou has its essential being not as an object of thought, but in its confrontation with the I, wherever one being inclines itself toward the other in all its fullness and gives itself to it. Buber underscores that the essence of the thou does not lie in thinking about it, but in the direct, personal encounter between two beings. It is in this moment of genuine confrontation and giving oneself to another that the I-thou relationship is formed. This relationship is the core of human existence, involving full presence and mutual recognition. Quote 71. Fulfillment of the ethical demand is the human calling, and this calling and responsibility intone a dialogue of existence which does not limit itself to the response that an individual man makes to another individual man and through him to God, but which swells to a universal antiphony of responses in which each and every being must speak to the other, and each one proclaims to the other his vocation. Buber emphasizes that ethical responsibility is central to human existence, and this responsibility goes beyond interactions between individuals. It extends to a universal dialogue where every being must respond to one another, creating a harmony of reciprocal relationships. Each being has a unique role or vocation to fulfill in this collective conversation, making existence itself a dialogue where both human and divine elements are interconnected. Quote 72. Everything in this world needs us, that all things strangely appeal to our concern, was also, as we know, a perception of the poet, of the Duino Elegy. This concern is not to say that we concern ourselves about the things in our own interest. Rather, it means a communion with the things in which we let the outpourings of their hearts go to our hearts. Buber reflects on the idea that everything in the world calls for human concern, not for personal gain, but for a deeper, empathetic communion with the essence of things. This idea, inspired by poetry, suggests that the world is constantly reaching out to us, and it is through an intimate, selfless connection that we truly engage with the world around us. This communion brings about a profound relationship with the world, where objects and beings reveal their true nature in dialogue with humans. 23. In devoted vision and reverent forming, too, there can occur a movement of love, in which, to speak with Proust, we bend toward an individual thing so that we not only observe it as a show, but believe in it as in a created being without a like. This quote conveys Buber's belief in the power of love and reverence in human relationships with the world. He suggests that when we approach things or people with genuine love, we go beyond mere observation and recognize them as unique creations. This act of loving deeply and uniquely allows us to see the true essence of the other, fostering a sacred relationship that transcends mere perception. Quote 74. Man can, to be sure, contend for justice with the Lord of the covenant, as do Abraham and Job, but he cannot judge him. One can only submit to the incomprehensible. Buber points out the limits of human understanding when it comes to divine justice. While humans can seek justice and question God, as Abraham and Job did, they cannot fully grasp or judge the divine. God's ways are ultimately beyond human comprehension, and true faith involves submission to this mystery. The relationship with God is based on trust and acceptance of the unknown, where humans acknowledge their limitations in understanding the full scope of divine will. Quote 75. The miracle of superterrestrial revelation in the terrestrial present can only be attested to belief through its actuality. As a miracle, it cannot be proved. Buber suggests that divine revelation, which connects the transcendent with the earthly, cannot be proven through rational means. Its truth lies in its experience and actuality, and belief in it comes from the reality of its occurrence. The miracle of divine presence is something that is felt and lived, not something that can be scientifically demonstrated or explained. This underscores the importance of personal experience in matters of faith and revelation. Quote 76. The I-thou relation alone is the bearer of meaning. The immediacy of the dialogic encounter provides its own rationale. Buber emphasizes that true meaning in life comes from the I-thou relationship, where individuals engage in direct, authentic encounters with others. This kind of relationship provides its own justification and does not require external validation. In this type of interaction, meaning is created through the connection itself, rather than through intellectual analysis or objective measures, which belong to the I-it realm. Quote 77. The tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no value depending on my mood, but it is bodied over against me and has to do with me, as I with it, only in a different way. Buber describes his I-thou encounter with a tree, illustrating that the relationship is not just a subjective experience, but a real interaction with something outside of himself. The tree has its own presence and stands as an independent being with which he engages. This shows that the I-thou relationship can extend beyond human interactions, encompassing the natural world as well, where the other being plays a significant, distinct role in the encounter. Quote 78. There is no criterion which removes the risk. Only the total participation of the self in the full presentness of the encounter can serve as a source of verification. Here, Buber addresses the element of risk in the I-thou relationship. Unlike the I-it world, where things can be measured and verified objectively, the I-thou relationship requires full immersion and commitment without the safety of external validation. The only way to verify the reality of such an encounter is through one's total involvement in the present moment, accepting the risk of being wrong or misunderstood as part of the experience. Quote 79. The eternal thou is a singular thou indeed. It is the symbol for God in Buber's philosophy of I and thou. Buber introduces the concept of the eternal thou to describe God as the ultimate partner in the I-thou relationship. The eternal thou represents the divine presence that sustains all encounters and dialogues, whether with nature, other people, or God. This thou is unique in that it never becomes an it, remaining always as a fully present, personal being who is approached through relationships. Quote 80. Spinoza's fundamental mistake was that he imagined the teaching of Israel to mean that God is also a person, and he turned against this as a lessening of the Godhead. Buber critiques Spinoza's interpretation of the Jewish concept of God, stating that Spinoza misunderstood the belief that God could be personal. Buber argues that viewing God as both a personal and transcendent being does not diminish his divinity, but instead elevates it, showing the profound nature of God's relationship with humanity. This idea reflects Buber's belief in the necessity of a personal, dialogical relationship with God, which lies at the heart of his philosophy. Quote 81. What mankind needs is the awareness that God is not a mere idea of the mind, but an infinite and absolute reality that exists independently of it, and that salvation depends upon man's self-commitment with his entire being in thought, feeling, and action to faith in this living God. Buber argues that God is not an intellectual construct or idea, but a real, independent force. Salvation is not achieved through abstract reasoning, but through full engagement, mind, heart, and action, with faith in this living God. He emphasizes that demands a personal existential relationship with God, one that involves the whole being, rather than treating God as a mere concept to be understood. Quote 82. Plato entertained a lifelong ambition to found a republic in accordance with his concept of justice, in the hope that he would thereby influence the existing states to follow the example of that republic. Buber critiques Plato's idealism, noting that Plato sought to shape the world according to his abstract ideas of justice by attempting to create a model republic. However, Buber suggests that this approach is flawed because it assumes that philosophical ideas alone can govern reality. For Buber, this contrasts with the prophetic tradition, which engages with the specific, lived realities of a community rather than abstract ideal forms. Quote 83. Zionism could not succeed unless it were animated by the spirit of messianism. Buber insists that for Zionism to be more than a political movement, it must be inspired by the spirit of Messianism, meaning it should aim for the spiritual renewal of the Jewish people and their relationship with God. Without this spiritual foundation, Zionism would risk becoming a mere nationalistic project, devoid of deeper meaning and purpose. For Buber, the return to Israel should involve a rekindling of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. Quote 84. The fact, however, that we Jews still exist as a people proves that Isaiah's failure was different from Plato's. In this quote, Buber reflects on the enduring impact of the prophet Isaiah compared to the failure of Plato's philosophical project. Although Isaiah's immediate mission appeared to fail, his words continued to inspire and guide the Jewish people across centuries. Buber contrasts this with Plato's unrealized vision of the ideal state, showing that Isaiah's message of moral and spiritual responsibility had a lasting influence embedded in the life and survival of the Jewish people. Quote 85. The prophet's spirit does not, like Plato's, believe that he possesses an abstract and general, a timeless concept of truth. He receives one message for one situation. That is exactly why, after thousands of years, his words still address the changing situations in history. This quote highlights the difference between the prophetic approach and the philosophical approach to truth. While Plato seeks universal truths applicable to all situations, the prophet speaks to specific moments and contexts, which gives the prophetic message a lasting relevance. Buber argues that the prophet's words endure because they are grounded in the realities of their time, allowing them to be reinterpreted to address new circumstances throughout history. Quote 86. What mankind needs is the awareness that God is not a mere idea of the mind, but an infinite and absolute reality that exists independently of it, and that salvation depends upon man's self-commitment with his entire being in thought, feeling, and action to faith in this living God. Buber stresses that God cannot be reduced to an abstract concept or idea. Instead, God is a real, independent being, and salvation depends on an individual's full engagement with this living God. True faith, according to Buber, requires not just intellectual belief, but the complete involvement of the mind, heart, and actions in a relationship with God. Quote 87. The Bible has, in the form of a glorified remembrance, given vivid, decisive expression to an ever-recurrent happening. In the infinite language of events and situations, eternally changing but plain to the truly attentive, transcendence speaks to our hearts at the essential moments of personal life. Buber believes that the Bible offers more than historical or moral teachings. It expresses a living relationship with God that continues to speak to people in different times and situations. The events described in the Bible are not just stories from the past, but serve as a means through which individuals can experience transcendence in their own lives, as long as they are open and attentive to its message. Quote 88. We Jews are a community based on memory. A common memory has kept us together and enabled us to survive. Buber emphasizes the importance of collective memory in maintaining Jewish identity and continuity. The shared memory of past events and experiences has sustained the Jewish people through generations, giving them a sense of unity and purpose. This memory is not static, but grows and evolves with each generation, continuing to nourish Jewish existence and providing the foundation for their survival as a people. Quote 89. The Jewish and Christian God descends to meet man, and a man does not pass, from the moment of supreme meeting, the same being as he entered into it. Buber highlights the transformative nature of divine revelation in both Judaism and Christianity. When God reveals himself to a person, that encounter fundamentally changes the person. This experience is not merely an intellectual or emotional event, but a profound spiritual transformation. The revelation brings a new awareness and understanding that permanently alters the individual's being. Quote 90. The biblical God, who is beyond the universe yet enters into it, was a mere myth of bygone ages. This quote reflects the modern critique of traditional religious beliefs, where revelation is dismissed as mythological. Buber presents the challenge that modern thinkers pose to the biblical view of God, suggesting that this worldview, which allows God to act within the world, is seen as outdated in a rational scientific age. The modern attack on revelation questions the possibility of a God who interacts with humanity, reducing such beliefs to ancient superstition. Quote 91. It is not necessary for me to give up any of the ways in which I consider the tree. There is nothing from which I would have to turn my eyes away in order to see, and no knowledge that I would have to forget. In this quote, Buber emphasizes that when engaging in an I-thou relationship, one does not need to abandon scientific or objective knowledge. Rather, the I-thou experience adds a deeper layer of understanding that coexists with the I-it perspective. Buber argues that fully experiencing reality includes both the analytical and the relational modes of knowing, and they complement each other without diminishing the significance of either. Quote 92. If the thou escapes rational inquiry, it is not because the latter is rational, but because it presupposes detachment. Buber explains that the I-thou relationship cannot be fully understood through rational inquiry, not because it is irrational, but because rational inquiry requires a detached, objective stance. The I-thou relationship, however, involves personal engagement and mutual presence, which cannot be captured through detached analysis. This distinction illustrates that some aspects of human experience, like love, friendship, and divine encounters, are beyond the reach of scientific or objective methods of understanding. Quote 93. The I-thou relation is the form of knowledge in which the fullness of reality is encountered. Buber asserts that true knowledge of reality is found in the I-thou relationship, where individuals engage with others, or with God, in a personal, direct encounter. This type of knowledge is deeper and more complete than objective, I-it knowledge, which reduces others to objects. In the I-thou relation, both participants reveal their true selves, and through this encounter, the fullness of reality is experienced, making this knowledge more profound and transformative. Quote 94. The God of dialogue, like any thou of any dialogue, speaks to a unique partner in a unique situation, disclosing himself according to the unique exigencies of each situation. This quote reflects Buber's belief that God's revelation is not a fixed, timeless truth, but a dynamic interaction. God reveals himself in response to each individual's unique circumstances. Just as in any human dialogue, the conversation is shaped by the participants and their situation. This emphasizes the personal, relational nature of divine revelation, where God's presence is adapted to the needs of the moment, making each encounter distinct and alive. Quote 95. God, Buber asserts, is the thou that by its nature cannot become an it. Buber asserts that God, unlike other beings or objects, can never be reduced to an it, something that can be analyzed, objectified, or used. In the I-thou relationship, God remains always as a thou, preserving the integrity and immediacy of a personal reciprocal relationship. This distinction highlights Buber's central idea that God's nature is uniquely relational and can only be understood through direct engagement, not through detached observation or objectification. Quote 96. Revelation reveals the thou that cannot become an it. Here we have Buber's criterion of distinction. Buber distinguishes divine revelation from other types of experiences by emphasizing that revelation always reveals the divine thou, a presence that cannot be turned into an it. This means that true revelation brings the individual into a direct, personal relationship with God, where God remains fully present and never becomes an object of analysis or manipulation. The unique quality of revelation lies in this unmediated encounter with the divine, which transcends all forms of objectification. Quote 97. God is infinite because in the moment of encounter there is no it which can limit him. He is eternal because it is known in the here and now that he cannot turn into an it in any here and now. Buber explains that in the moment of revelation, God's infinity and eternity are realized through the absence of any objectification. God's presence in the encounter is boundless because he cannot be confined by anything that would limit him as an it. This means that God's eternal nature is not an abstract concept, but is experienced directly in the relationship, where he remains fully present and free from being reduced to an object. Quote 98. Revelation is hearable content only in relation to committed listening. If it is to be nevertheless independent of our response, revelation must force us into committed listening. But this, we have already seen, is impossible. Buber underscores the necessity of active engagement in receiving revelation. Revelation requires the listener to be fully committed to hearing. It does not simply impose itself upon the person. This mutual dynamic between divine communication and human receptivity emphasizes that revelation cannot happen without a willing, open response from the individual. The relationship is not passive, but a two-way interaction where both God and the human play active roles in the encounter. Quote 99. Each thing and being has a twofold nature: the passive, absorbable, usable, dissectable, comparable, combinable, rationalizable, and the other, the active, non-absorbable, unusable, undissectable, incomparable, non-combinable, non-rationalizable. Buber argues that every being and object possesses two sides, one that can be analyzed, used, or measured by rationality, and another that defies rational understanding and can only be experienced directly. This second nature is what we encounter in moments of deep connection when we approach the world not as an object to be manipulated, but as a living, present reality. This duality in things allows for both scientific analysis and spiritual engagement, with the latter being central to Buber's philosophy. Quote 100. Man is appointed to bring reality out of its bifurcation into unity. The world waits for man to unify it. In this quote, Buber suggests that humanity's task is to unify the fragmented aspects of reality. The world is divided and disconnected, but through our actions and relationships, we have the power to bring it into harmony. This unity is not passive, but requires active participation from individuals to create a reality that reflects the interconnectedness of all things, with God as the ultimate source of unity. Quote 101. Buber rejects mysticism if this be understood to mean that the mystic negates the world and believes that he will find beyond it a path to God. Buber insists that the way to God leads directly through this world. This quote highlights Buber's firm stance against the mystic tendency to reject the world in the pursuit of God. Instead, Buber argues that the path to God is found not by abandoning the physical world, but by engaging with it fully. He values the lived experiences of the world as integral to encountering the divine. By embracing the world rather than negating it, Buber believes that one can find deeper spiritual fulfillment and connection with God. Quote 102. God is not something to be believed in, but to be fulfilled. In this quote, Buber challenges the traditional notion of belief in God as an intellectual or passive exercise. For Buber, faith is not merely about holding certain beliefs, but about actively fulfilling God's presence through actions and relationships. Living out one's faith through deeds, rather than simply professing belief, is central to realizing the divine in everyday life. Quote 103. Reality is no fixed condition, but a quantity which can be heightened. Its magnitude is functionally dependent upon the intensity of our experiencing. This quote emphasizes Buber's view that reality is not static, but grows more profound as we engage with it more intensely. The depth of our experiences, the way we fully immerse ourselves in the present, determines the degree of reality we encounter. By engaging wholeheartedly with the world around us, we can elevate the significance and reality of our surroundings, making them more meaningful and real. Quote 104. The true locus of realization is community, and true community is that in which the divine becomes realized among men. Buber emphasizes that spiritual realization does not occur in isolation, but within the context of community. It is through relationships and shared experiences within a community that individuals can truly encounter and realize the divine. This view underscores the importance of interpersonal connections and collective life as spaces where spiritual fulfillment and divine presence can manifest. Quote 105. There is no salvation other than through Christ. Paul is almost completely silent in his epistles on the subject of the turning to which Jesus, like the prophets and the Pharisees, had summoned man. This quote critiques Paul's theological emphasis on salvation through Christ, contrasting it with the teachings of Jesus and earlier Jewish prophets who focused on a call to repentance and ethical living. Buber suggests that Paul's theology introduces a shift toward a more exclusive and doctrinal approach to salvation, which differs from the broader, immediate relationship with God that Jesus advocated. Quote 106. To have trust means by its very essence to demonstrate one's faith in the fullness of life, despite all possible experience to the contrary. This quote underscores the nature of trust as an active demonstration of faith, even in the face of hardship or negative experiences. Buber argues that true trust in God requires individuals to maintain their faith and belief in the meaningfulness of life, even when circumstances seem to challenge that faith. This type of trust is resilient and deeply embedded in the lived experience of faith, regardless of external difficulties. Quote 107. Jesus regarded the Torah, the traditional instruction, as capable of fulfillment. Indeed, following the rabbinical example, he even went beyond its requirements. Buber asserts that Jesus remained deeply rooted in Jewish tradition, particularly in his approach to the Torah. While Jesus pushed the boundaries of its teachings, he still viewed the Torah as something that could be lived out in everyday life. This view situates Jesus firmly within the Jewish context, showing that his innovations were extensions of the tradition, rather than rejections of it. Quote 108. Paul regarded the world and all flesh as being in the power of the evil inclination, with the one exception, which was sharpened to the demand for belief in Christ as the Savior of the world, on the basis of a divine cosmic plan. Buber contrasts Paul's worldview with that of classical Judaism. For Paul, humanity is largely under the sway of evil forces, and salvation comes only through belief in Christ. This represents a shift from the Jewish emphasis on moral effort and the possibility of returning to the good. Buber highlights Paul's theological perspective as introducing a cosmic plan for salvation, centered around the sacrificial role of Christ. Quote 109. The historical depth of the moment in which the remark was uttered must be understood from the deification which the speaker expected after his death. It is as though he were resisting this development, as though he were rejecting the faith in himself in favor of an immediacy of faith in God, which he felt and which he wished to help man attain. In this reflection on Jesus' rejection of being called good, Buber suggests that Jesus was resisting the process of deification that was expected after his death. Jesus' statement indicates his desire to direct people toward a direct and immediate faith in God, rather than in himself as a divine figure. This moment reflects Jesus' commitment to preserving the distinction between humanity and divinity, and his emphasis on faith in God. Quote 110. For Israel, in keeping with the essence of his faith, everything depends upon being able to realize one's faith as an experienced trust in God. Buber asserts that the central element of Jewish faith is not merely intellectual belief, but trust in God that is actively lived out and experienced in daily life. This trust transforms one's faith into a full embodied relationship with the divine, where living in God's sight becomes an integral part of human existence. Faith, for Buber, is not confined to ritual or thought, but is demonstrated through living a life in trust, despite any adversities. Quote 111. The driving power of Christ's message consists in the old Jewish demand for an unconditional decision which transforms man and raises him into the kingdom of God. Here, Buber acknowledges that the transformative power of Jesus' message lies in its call for an unconditional decision to align with God's will. This demand echoes the earlier Jewish tradition of complete devotion to God, which requires a radical transformation of the individual's life. The message of Jesus, according to Buber, is not an innovation but a continuation of the Jewish emphasis on moral and spiritual renewal. Quote 112. Israel is not transcending in this claim, pointing, as it were, to a Messiah, only whose suffering would become truly redemptive for the people and for mankind. Rather, it remains self-contained. Buber explains that Israel's understanding of itself is deeply connected to its role as a suffering people chosen by God. However, Israel does not look to an external Messiah to bring redemption, but understands its own suffering as part of its unique relationship with God. This self-contained view of Israel's role reflects the Jewish belief in a direct, enduring covenant with God that does not rely on external salvation. Quote 113. The Jewish people are one people, just like other peoples and races. But the Jews are not ruled by national deities, but by God Himself, and they are, for this very reason, singularly chosen for the sake of all others. Buber highlights the unique relationship between the Jewish people and God, which differentiates them from other nations that follow their own gods. He underscores that the Jewish people have been chosen by God not for their own sake, but for the benefit of all humanity. This chosen status confers upon the Jewish people a special mission that transcends national boundaries and carries a universal significance. Quote 114. Judaism is original humanism, and, qua such, is, whether openly or concealed, the form and propelling force of world history. Here, Buber presents Judaism as the foundation of humanistic ideals. He argues that the values inherent in Judaism, such as justice, morality, and the pursuit of truth, have shaped the course of world history. These ideals, according to Buber, serve as the driving force behind many of the world's moral and ethical advancements, positioning Judaism as a key influence on the evolution of human civilization. Quote 115. Every form of dualism is forbidden. Thus only the prophetic remains as the enduring core, an ever-new fidelity to ever-new freedom and realization. Buber rejects dualism, the division between sacred and secular, or spiritual and material, arguing instead for an integrated life where every aspect of existence is connected to the divine. He believes that the prophetic tradition represents this unified approach, where freedom and realization come from continuously renewing one's commitment to God in every moment. The prophetic message calls for a dynamic, evolving faith that is lived out fully in the world. Quote 116. In order to make the absolute otherness of God bearable to suffering man, without escaping into religious magic, Buber takes recourse to the Kabbalistic myth, which is advanced by Hasidism. The myth of God's Shekinah, who, together with the suffering ones, wanders into exile. Buber uses the Kabbalistic concept of the Shekinah to express God's presence with humanity in suffering. According to this myth, God does not remain distant from human pain, but accompanies individuals in their struggles, sharing in their suffering. This idea reflects Buber's belief in a God who is deeply involved in the human experience, offering solidarity rather than magical solutions. It also aligns with his emphasis on the relational nature of the divine, where God remains present even in times of darkness and exile. Quote 117. Scripture is to be studied not as a work of literature, but as a basic document of the Absolute's impact upon the national spirit of Israel. Buber stresses that the Bible should not be approached merely as a literary text, but as a profound record of how the divine, referred to as the Absolute, shaped the identity and spiritual consciousness of Israel. For Buber, understanding the Bible requires going beyond literary analysis to recognize its role as a living document that reflects the transformative influence of God on the Jewish people. This perspective emphasizes the Bible's significance as a foundational religious text rather than just a historical or cultural artifact. Quote 118. The narrative of the desert sanctuary, as compared with the story of creation, is cited as another example of how Scripture may instruct modern man. Buber draws a parallel between the story of the creation of the world and the construction of the desert sanctuary. Both narratives, he argues, reflect God's intention for humanity to participate in creation and revelation. Just as God created the world and offered it to humanity, the sanctuary is a place where God's presence is revealed, but it must be built by human hands. This comparison underscores the responsibility of humans to engage with and complete God's work, highlighting a dynamic relationship between divine will and human action. Quote 119. Revelation, however, fulfills the mystery of creation. It is in the act of revelation that God bids man to become a partner in the work of creation. In this quote, Buber explains that revelation is not separate from creation, but its fulfillment. Through revelation, God invites humanity to share in the ongoing process of creation. This partnership between God and humanity is central to Buber's philosophy, where humans are called to actively engage in the world and contribute to its spiritual and moral development, continuing the work that God began. Quote 120. Man learns how to build, but no one directs his working hand. The abode of the holy must be erected by him alone, or it will not be established. Buber emphasizes that while divine guidance is present, humans must take responsibility for creating sacred spaces and bringing holiness into the world. God may offer the blueprint, but the task of building rests entirely with humanity. This reflects Buber's belief in the active role humans must play in fulfilling their spiritual duties, where divine will and human action must work in harmony to manifest God's presence in the world. Quote 121. The Bible, document of the dialogue between God and man, can be validly understood by that reader alone, who is ready to become a partner in the dialogue. Buber stresses that understanding the Bible requires personal involvement. The text is not just an ancient document to be studied from a distance, it is a living conversation between God and humanity. To truly grasp its meaning, the reader must be open to participating in this dialogue, approaching the text with the expectation of being addressed and responding in return. This active engagement is essential to discovering the Bible's full relevance and power. Quote 122. The Spirit of God assumes the attitude of waiting for man to fulfill the intention of creation. In this quote, Buber portrays God as patient, allowing humans the freedom to act and fulfill their role in the divine plan. The future is not predetermined. Rather, it depends on human choice and action. Buber's view highlights the collaborative nature of the relationship between God and humanity, where God waits for people to take responsibility for their choices and move toward fulfilling the purpose of creation. Quote 123. Apocalyptic elements are at work in our own age, Buber finds. Karl Marx's view of the future is not of the prophetic kind, as some have thought, but follows the pattern of the apocalyptic. Buber critiques Marxist thought, suggesting that it follows the apocalyptic mindset, which removes human agency from shaping the future. In Marxism, as in apocalyptic thinking, the future is determined by a set of inevitable forces, leaving no room for individual choice or moral responsibility. Buber contrasts this with the prophetic tradition, which holds that human action and free will play a crucial role in shaping history. Quote 124. Job's experience of the absurd is not argued or explained. The answer consists in God's reference, in all detail, to the creation. Buber highlights that in the book of Job, God does not offer Job an explanation for his suffering, but points him to the grandeur of creation. This response shifts the focus from human suffering to the broader context of existence, emphasizing the mystery and vastness of the world. For Buber, this reveals that while human pain may not be fully understood, the act of creation itself represents a form of communication and relationship between God and humanity. Quote 125. Everywhere man is called to meeting and encounter, Begegnung. Buber emphasizes that the Bible constantly calls humans into a relationship with God, framed as a meeting or encounter. This engagement is not distant or theoretical, but involves an intimate dialogue where God addresses humanity directly. Revelation occurs in the immediacy of these encounters, and through them, individuals come to know God. The Bible, for Buber, is a record of these encounters, each inviting the reader to participate in their own meeting with the divine. Quote 126. Creation is the origin, redemption the goal, but revelation is not a fixed dated point poised between the two. Buber highlights that creation and redemption form the bookends of human history, but revelation is not confined to a single moment in time. Instead, revelation is ongoing, occurring continuously as individuals become aware of God's presence and purpose in their lives. This understanding of revelation as dynamic and evolving challenges the notion of a singular historical event and encourages an active engagement with the divine at every moment. Buber's, quote 127, extraordinary recognition of the power and vitality of words is rooted in his sense of the nature of human life in speaking and listening. Buber deeply values the spoken word, recognizing its power to shape reality and create relationships. His understanding of language is tied to his broader philosophy of dialogue, where speaking and listening are fundamental acts that define human existence. In the biblical context, the words of Scripture are not just text to be read, but living words that carry the weight of divine human dialogue, inviting individuals into active participation with the message they convey. Quote 128. The Bible for him is essentially one book, united by several great themes and by its pervasive existential character. Buber views the Bible as a unified text, where the themes of creation, revelation, and redemption interweave to form a single narrative of divine human interaction. He sees the Bible as a living document that addresses the existential concerns of humanity across time, presenting a dialogue between God and humanity that remains relevant in every era. For Buber, these themes are not isolated, but form a cohesive whole that speaks to the fundamental nature of existence. Quote 129. The myth is the spontaneous and proper speech of the expecting as of the remembering faith, but it is not its substance. Here, Buber distinguishes between myth as a way of expressing religious experiences and the deeper reality that those myths convey. Myths serve as a language to communicate profound truths about faith, but they are not the faith itself. The substance of faith lies in the lived relationship with the divine, beyond the symbolic representation found in myth. This understanding helps reconcile the use of mythical language with the ongoing, real experiences of faith. Quote 130. The Hasidim were willing to give up the service of God in corporality as a legitimate way in the service of God as soon as it became apparent to them that it was purchased at the price of true devakuth. In this quote, Buber notes that while Hasidism initially embraced the idea of serving God through everyday actions in the physical world, it later recognized the risks involved in this approach. Hasidic leaders realized that focusing too much on material actions could interfere with devakuth, the essential connection to God. When this balance was threatened, the Hasidim were willing to abandon worldly service to maintain the purity of their spiritual devotion, demonstrating their commitment to the priority of divine attachment over material involvement. Quote 131. Buber sees in it a pansacramentalist process, a message of the hallowing of the world, which he interprets as an act in which the world is endowed with direction. Buber's interpretation of Hasidism elevates the concept of serving God through the material world, viewing it as a process in which all actions in the world become sacred by giving them spiritual direction. He believes that by infusing worldly acts with divine purpose, the world itself becomes a space where God's presence is realized. This interpretation suggests that human actions have the potential to sanctify the world, transforming mundane tasks into acts of spiritual significance. Hasid, quote 132. Hasidism never supposed that God wishes us to serve him in the world, because it is that in which he wants to receive an answer from me. Buber contrasts his view with traditional Hasidism, noting that Hasidism does not see worldly service as an inherent response God desires. Instead, Hasidism treats engagement with the material world as a necessary but secondary aspect of spiritual life, not the core of religious practice. Buber, on the other hand, places more emphasis on the world as a space where human responses to God are essential, thus expanding the Hasidic view to include a more active role for the material world in divine-human interaction. Quote 133. The purpose of man's creation is that he should raise up the worlds to their roots, that is, restore them to nothingness as they were before, by means of study, prayer, and good deeds. This quote encapsulates the Hasidic belief that the purpose of human life is to spiritually elevate the physical world, returning it to its divine source. Through acts of study, prayer, and righteous deeds, individuals participate in the redemption of the world, reconnecting it with its original divine state. This process of elevation highlights the Hasidic focus on spiritual transformation, where the material world is seen not as an end in itself, but as something to be transcended and returned to its sacred origins. Quote 134. Man's relationship to the concrete is a secondary problem in Hasidic teaching. The attempt to clarify this relationship grew out of the discussion of the main problem, that of devakuth, cleaving to God. This quote highlights that Hasidism's primary concern is with devakuth, or the continuous connection with God. The relationship to the material world is considered secondary, and the exploration of this issue only arises because it becomes necessary when trying to maintain constant spiritual devotion. For Hasidism, the physical world serves as a backdrop for maintaining spiritual focus, but it is not the core of religious practice. Quote 135. Contact with the world has become the factor that liberates man from the world and his dependence on it. In this statement, Buber notes that interacting with the material world allows individuals to overcome its hold on them. By engaging with the world while maintaining spiritual intention, a person frees themselves from being dominated by worldly concerns. This paradox of engaging with the world to rise above it reflects Hasidism's teaching that material actions can be infused with spiritual purpose, turning worldly interactions into opportunities for spiritual growth. Quote 136. The redemption of things to Buber means man's turning to them in goodwill and faithfulness. Redemption through dialogue. Buber reinterprets Hasidism's idea of redeeming the sparks of divinity as an act of engaging with the world through goodwill and dialogue. He suggests that by approaching the world with sincerity and a readiness to encounter the divine within it, one participates in the redemption of creation. This perspective focuses on the importance of human interactions with the world and the potential for these encounters to bring about spiritual transformation. Quote 137. The goal must remain hidden, undefined, for otherwise it is doomed to burst apart. Buber believes that defining spiritual goals too clearly can undermine their fulfillment. By leaving the ultimate spiritual goal undefined, he argues, individuals are better able to focus on the present moment and engage with it fully. This approach avoids the risk of turning spiritual striving into rigid objectives, keeping the process of seeking God dynamic and open-ended. Quote 138. The service of God is a discipline that subjugates the periphery to the center, whose radiation is constantly streaming down on it. Here, Buber emphasizes that the service of God involves aligning all aspects of life, especially the peripheral, everyday activities, with the central spiritual purpose of devotion. Every action becomes part of the service to God when it is brought under the influence of this central focus. This view elevates even the mundane aspects of life, suggesting that they can be infused with divine significance when directed toward a higher spiritual aim. Quote 139. Buber argues that it is precisely through the anecdote that teachings were transmitted, and precisely here that it becomes possible to feel the pulse of life. Buber suggests that anecdotal stories, often dismissed as minor, are crucial in understanding the essence of Hasidic teachings. These short narratives provide a window into the lived experiences and spiritual struggles of individuals, capturing the vibrancy and immediacy of the Hasidic worldview. For Buber, these stories are not merely tales, but convey the depth of spiritual life, allowing readers to sense the living pulse of faith and religious practice. Quote 140. The coming of the holy Yehudi to the seer of Lublin partakes from the first of the ideological struggle over the way of Hasidism. This quote introduces the tension between two different schools of thought within Hasidism: the inward, contemplative approach represented by the holy Yehudi, and the more outward, community-oriented approach of the seer of Lublin. Buber uses this encounter to explore the deeper ideological conflict within Hasidism, reflecting the broader debate on how to live a spiritual life, whether through isolation and mystical attainment or through active engagement with the world. Quote 141. But do you not see, Jacob Yitzchak, the Tzaddik asked, that God himself uses evil? God may, Rabbi. God can use all things, seeing that nothing can prevail against him. But the good, if it seeks to make use of evil, it drowns in that evil. In this exchange, Buber presents a debate about the role of evil in the world. The Tzaddik believes that God can make use of evil as part of his divine plan, while the holy Yehudi cautions that human beings, in trying to manipulate or use evil, become corrupted by it. The conversation reflects Buber's exploration of moral boundaries, suggesting that while divine providence may encompass all things, including evil, human actions must remain pure and avoid entanglement with evil. Quote 142. The Yehudi answers Yeshaya's remonstrations over his delay in the time of prayer. The word, that it may be a living word, needs us. Buber portrays the Yehudi's belief that prayer is not just about adhering to scheduled times, but about making the words of prayer alive through personal devotion and spiritual readiness. The delay in prayer is not negligence, but an intentional act of waiting until one is fully present and able to engage with the divine. This view emphasizes the importance of the inner experience of prayer, rather than its outward performance, reflecting Buber's broader theme of authentic religious practice. Quote 143. The message of Hasidism in Buber's view is its great faith that we can act and are bidden to act. Even if the paths of heaven are not clear to us, the paths of earth are clear to the Holy One. Buber underscores the Hasidic belief in the power of human action within the world. Even when divine intentions or the ultimate plan remain obscure, people are called to act with faith and trust that their actions have significance. The clear path on earth is to live in alignment with God's will, regardless of the uncertainty about heavenly matters. This message aligns with Buber's emphasis on the importance of human responsibility and agency in religious life. Quote 144. Buber's concern is with life in its totality, and with man in his confrontation with the manifold world. Moreover, any interpretation of the Word of God covers the entire human life and activity. From this totality, political life cannot be excluded. Buber emphasizes that politics cannot be separated from the broader context of human life and the divine. He argues that every aspect of existence, including politics, is interconnected with one's relationship with God and with other people. This means that political decisions and actions are inherently tied to moral and spiritual considerations. For Buber, politics is not an isolated realm, but part of the total human experience, requiring the same attention to ethical and divine principles as any other aspect of life. Quote 145. We live at a juncture in which the problem of a common human destiny has become so obstinate that the experienced administrators of the political principle are, for the most part, only able to go through the motions of matching its demands. In this statement, Buber critiques the current state of political leadership, suggesting that politicians are lost in managing the complexities of modern life. Rather than addressing the real, underlying problems of humanity, They are merely maintaining appearances, unable to truly respond to the deeper issues of human destiny. This reveals Buber's concern that political systems, focused on power and control, have drifted away from their true purpose of serving humanity's greater moral and spiritual needs. Quote 146. The political principle, embodied in the state, is the regulating force because of the internal and external dangers which threaten the existence of society. Buber acknowledges the necessity of political structures, especially the state, to maintain order and address threats both within and outside of society. However, this recognition is tempered by his understanding that political systems should serve the higher purpose of ensuring justice and freedom, not simply enforcing power. Buber sees the state as a mechanism for managing conflict, but warns against allowing it to dominate human life at the expense of moral and ethical considerations. Quote 147. True political action should create the conditions for the realization of justice and individual freedom, preservation of human dignity, and fulfillment of the commandments of human ethics. For Buber, the ultimate goal of politics is not simply governance or the exercise of power, but the creation of a society where justice, freedom, and human dignity are upheld. Political actions must align with ethical principles and should aim to foster conditions where individuals can live meaningful, moral lives. This view reinforces Buber's belief that politics must be grounded in a higher ethical purpose, connected to the divine and human good. Quote 148. Community as a natural creation, according to Toenis, was originally founded on blood and instinct, but it also became an ideal to be established through the free will of men. Buber reflects on Ferdinand Toenis's concept of community, noting that while communities originally formed around natural bonds, such as family and instinct, they also represent a higher ideal that humans can consciously choose to create. This idea aligns with Buber's vision of building intentional, ethical communities where people are bound together by shared values and mutual respect, rather than just by necessity or circumstance. Quote 149. What then can man do to try to pave the way for the good within the deformity of public life, where the group interests demand his loyalty? The answer is, as much as he can. Buber acknowledges the tension between personal morality and the demands of group loyalty in public life. He emphasizes that individuals must do as much as they can within the limits of their conscience, without compromising their integrity. This approach allows for a realistic engagement with the world while maintaining a moral stance. Buber's idea of as much as one can suggests that even in difficult political situations, people should strive to act ethically within their capacity. Quote 150. That one cannot serve God, and mammon is an entirely true saying, for mammon embraces the soul and leaves nothing of it free. On the other hand, I believe that it is possible to serve God and the group to which one belongs if one is courageously intent on serving God in the sphere of the group as much as one can. Here, Buber contrasts the impossibility of serving both God and material wealth, mammon, with the possibility of serving both God and a community. He argues that as long as one's service to the group does not infringe upon their moral commitment to God, it is possible to balance both. This reflects Buber's belief that religious and social responsibilities can coexist, as long as one remains mindful of prioritizing divine service in their interactions within the group. Quote 151. Modern politics, and especially the political party, does not know this true conflict of conscience. Party politics simplifies the moral problem, availing itself of the comfortable principle of dividing the world into friend and enemy. Buber critiques the moral oversimplification inherent in party politics, where complex ethical issues are reduced to a binary opposition between allies and enemies. This approach, he suggests, distorts moral judgment and allows people to justify unethical actions in the name of loyalty to their party. By framing political conflict in this way, parties encourage a mentality that undermines personal responsibility and conscience, leading to a dangerous distortion of moral truth. Quote 152. In such a situation, man is more than ever inclined to see his own principle in its original purity and the opposing one in its present deterioration, especially if the forces of propaganda confirm his instincts in order to make better use of them. Buber points out that in times of political conflict, individuals are often convinced of the righteousness of their own beliefs, while viewing their opponents as morally corrupt. This dynamic is exacerbated by propaganda, which manipulates people's instincts and biases to fuel the conflict. Buber warns that this self-righteous attitude deepens mistrust between opposing sides and hinders the possibility of genuine dialogue and understanding, contributing to the perpetuation of political strife. Quote 153. The political aim does not sanctify the means. Beware of secularized messianism. It is not permitted to confound the messianic vision with the temporary objects of politics. Buber warns against the misuse of religious ideals for political purposes, particularly the dangerous conflation of messianic aspirations with political agendas. He stresses that the messianic vision, which represents a future of peace and divine fulfillment, should not be manipulated to justify harmful political actions in the present. Secularizing messianism, according to Buber, risks distorting both politics and religion, leading to moral corruption. Quote 154. The dilemma, but also the crux of his historical thinking, is prescribed by the apparently contradictory task of taking the course of history seriously, and yet brushing history against its grain. Buber faces the challenge of engaging with history while also questioning its prevailing narratives. He believes that while history must be taken seriously, it should not be accepted uncritically. Buber wants to brush history against its grain, meaning he challenges the traditional, often one-sided interpretations of historical events. This reflects his desire to uncover deeper, often overlooked truths that may be buried under the dominant narratives created by victors and those in power. Quote 155. Hegel's philosophy of history, by elevating the course of history to the high court of justice, destroys, according to Buber, the dialogical meaning of history. Buber criticizes Hegel's view of history, which presents historical events as part of an inevitable, rational process. By doing so, Hegel removes the element of human freedom and dialogue. For Buber, history is not a monologue controlled by some overarching force, but a dialogue between God and humanity, where human beings play an active role. Hegel's approach, in Buber's view, devalues individual responsibility and the moral choices people must make in response to the challenges of history. Quote 156. Paul's process of history no longer cares about the men and the generations of men which it affects, but uses them and uses them up for higher ends. Buber critiques Paul's theology of history for treating individuals as instruments in a grand divine plan. According to this view, human beings are used for the fulfillment of God's predetermined will without regard for their personal experiences. Buber opposes this idea, insisting that history should respect human agency and the choices individuals make. He argues that every person's decisions are significant and should not be dismissed as part of a larger, inevitable scheme. Quote 157. The prophetic message preserves, according to Buber, the dialogical intercourse between the divine and the human from all temptation to insist the mystery of history in a dogmatic fashion. Buber values the prophetic approach to history, which maintains an open and dynamic dialogue between God and humanity. Unlike dogmatic interpretations that claim to know the ultimate meaning of history, prophecy allows for human freedom and moral choice. The prophetic voice encourages people to respond to God's call in the present moment, keeping history alive with the potential for change and redemption. Buber sees this as a more authentic way to understand the relationship between humanity and the divine. Quote 158. The apocalyptic message stands in direct antithesis to the prophetic experience of history. Nowhere in the text of the apocalyptic writers does Buber discern the experience of history actually open to alternatives. Buber contrasts apocalyptic thought with prophecy, criticizing the former for its deterministic view of history. In apocalyptic thinking, everything is already predetermined, and human choices have no real impact. Buber rejects this approach because it denies the possibility of change and the meaningful participation of individuals in shaping their destiny. In contrast, prophecy keeps history open, allowing for human action to influence the future, offering hope for redemption and transformation. Quote 159. Buber's statement about the prophetic theologium on history still stresses man's action as an agent of redemption, so as to recall the revolutionary activities interpretation of messianism of the early days. Buber emphasizes that in the prophetic tradition, human beings play an active role in the redemption of the world. He connects this idea to the early interpretations of messianism, where revolutionary actions and the struggle for justice were central to fulfilling God's will. For Buber, history is shaped not just by divine intervention, but by the choices and actions of people, who are called to respond to God's call for justice and renewal. 160. In the prophetic message I hear, however, first and foremost, overwhelmingly announced that God is God and not man, and that his ways are not to be measured with the yardstick of man. Buber underscores the core of the prophetic message, the acknowledgement of God's sovereignty. He emphasizes that God's actions and plans cannot be understood or measured by human standards. This recognition of divine transcendence sets the tone for the prophet's teachings, which call people to align with God's will, even when it challenges their understanding of justice or righteousness. Quote 161. The prophetic message preserves, according to Buber, the dialogical intercourse between the divine and the human from all temptation to insist the mystery of history in a dogmatic fashion, as in the Pauline message of the crucified Messiah. Buber praises the prophetic tradition for maintaining a dialogue between God and humanity, in contrast to the more rigid, predetermined view of history presented in Paul's theology. The prophets keep the future open, allowing for human choice and divine interaction, while Paul's approach, as Buber sees it, reduces history to a fixed narrative where humans are passive participants in a predetermined drama. Quote 162. The future is not fixed, for God wants man to come to him with full freedom to return to him even out of a plight of extreme hopelessness, and then to be really with him. Buber believes that God gives humanity the freedom to choose, even in the darkest moments. History remains open to change because God desires a genuine relationship with humans, one that is based on free will and the possibility of return, even after failure. This openness to redemption, regardless of past mistakes, is a key theme in Buber's interpretation of the prophetic tradition. Quote 163. The apocalyptic must does not imply the kind of necessity characteristic of the neutral must usually ascribed to the laws of nature, but is coined in the strongest anticipation of the end of history in the actuality of faith. Buber points out that the apocalyptic vision of history is not about natural inevitability, but about a deep faith in the eventual fulfillment of divine promises. The must of apocalyptic thinking is driven by a spiritual certainty about the culmination of history, rather than by the mechanistic laws of nature. This apocalyptic faith fuels a passionate expectation of the end times and shapes the actions of believers who see themselves as part of this unfolding divine plan. Quote 164. Buber continually preaches his central message to theologians and philosophers: keep God in the context of religious experience, and beware of the sciences with their cosmologies and ontologies. God will not speak to scientists. He must be found in worship and faith. Buber emphasizes that God is not to be understood through scientific or philosophical abstraction. Instead, the divine is experienced directly through faith and religious practice. For Buber, religious experience is the only true context in which one can encounter God, while scientific and cosmological approaches to understanding God misrepresent his essence. This focus on lived personal engagement with the divine reflects Buber's broader philosophy of dialogue and relationship, where God is discovered through faith and human experience rather than intellectual analysis. Quote 165. To be sure, he bursts occasionally into dogmatic utterance like a prophet, but behind his conviction is a well-grounded analysis of the available facts of religious experience. Here, Buber is recognized for sometimes adopting a prophetic tone in his philosophical discussions, yet his ideas are firmly rooted in an empirical analysis of religious experience. His bold assertions about God and spirituality are not merely speculative, but based on a deep understanding of how people experience and encounter the divine in their everyday lives. This combination of prophetic passion and empirical rigor makes Buber's religious philosophy both powerful and grounded in real human experience. Quote 166. God belongs in and to religion. Why look for him elsewhere? Buber asserts that God should be understood strictly within the framework of religion, rather than through other fields like science or philosophy. His argument suggests that attempting to find God outside the realm of religious experience leads to a misunderstanding of his nature. Buber insists that the divine is fundamentally tied to worship, faith, and spiritual practice, and any effort to find God outside these contexts misses the point of who God truly is. Quote 167. Community encounters are categorical and take their distinctive place beside the encounters of persons with nature and with God. Buber differentiates between different types of relationships: those between individuals and God, between individuals and nature, and between individuals within a community. Each of these encounters holds its own unique value and cannot be reduced to one another. This reflects Buber's broader philosophy that recognizes the distinctness of each relational category, while also emphasizing their importance in the fullness of human experience. Community life, therefore, is an essential aspect of reality, just as much as one's relationship with God and the natural world. Quote 168. For we remain in the world of the it, the world of space and time, and above all, of causality. Buber distinguishes between the world of the it and the world of the thou. The world of the it is the realm of objects, where everything is understood through space, time, and cause and effect. In this world, relationships are impersonal, and individuals are disconnected from true engagement with others and with the divine. Buber contrasts this with the world of the thou, where personal, meaningful encounters occur, emphasizing the importance of moving beyond a purely objective view of the world. Quote 169. The primary words or utterances, paroles, writes Buber from the opening pages of I and Thou, do not express something which has its cogency outside them. Rather, spoken, they provide the foundation for cogency. In this quote, Buber emphasizes that primary words like I-thou and I-it are not mere labels for things that exist independently of language. Instead, these words create and give meaning to relationships. For Buber, the act of speaking the word thou establishes a relationship and creates a world of dialogue, where mutual presence and interaction are essential. It reflects his view that language is not just a tool for describing reality, but actively shapes and forms the reality of our encounters with others. Quote 170. In things themselves, as in events, is to be heard the voice of God. Buber suggests that divine presence is not limited to sacred spaces or moments of religious significance, but can be found in the very fabric of everyday life. In both objects and events, God's voice can be heard, if one is attuned to it. This idea reflects Buber's broader philosophy that the divine permeates all aspects of existence, and it is through genuine encounters with the world around us that we can experience a relationship with God. Quote 171. Living means being addressed. We would need only to present ourselves and to perceive. Buber defines living as an active engagement with life, where one is constantly being addressed by the world, other people, and God. This quote emphasizes the importance of being fully present and receptive to these encounters. For Buber, life is not a passive experience, but a dialogue, where we are called to respond to the constant addressing of others and the world around us. To truly live is to engage in this ongoing interaction and to be open to its significance. Quote 172. There is a being which is not in me and which is not outside me. Every activity is an act in which I participate without being able to appropriate it. Buber points to the existence of a relational reality that transcends simple categorization as either internal or external. When individuals engage in meaningful activities or encounters, they are part of something larger than themselves, a reality they cannot fully possess or control. This highlights Buber's belief in the interconnectedness of human existence, where every relationship or act is part of a larger shared world, beyond individual ownership. Quote 173. It is not a matter of maintaining an image of God or a belief in God, but in sustaining the God who is. Buber stresses that faith is not about holding on to abstract beliefs or images of God, but about maintaining an active, lived relationship with God as a present reality. The focus is on sustaining this relationship through ongoing dialogue and engagement with the divine in everyday life. This view moves away from theological constructs and toward a more experiential understanding of faith, where God is not a distant concept, but a living presence in the here and now. Quote 174. He explains the being of God in terms of his meaning to man, while at the same time he explains the meaning of man in terms of his being with God. Buber emphasizes the interdependence of God's existence and human existence. For Buber, God's being is understood through the way he relates to humanity, and similarly, the essence of being human is defined by one's relationship with God. This mutual definition reflects Buber's philosophy of dialogue, where the relationship between God and man is central to understanding both the divine and human existence. The interaction between God and humanity forms the foundation of both divine and human identity. Quote 175. One cannot believe in, espouse, a meaning or a value, unless one has discovered it rather than invented it. The value must have come to me in my meeting with being. Buber argues that true meaning and values are not created by individuals, but are discovered through encounters with reality. For Buber, values emerge in the context of relationships, whether with people, nature, or God. This discovery process is central to Buber's philosophy, where meaningful connections with the world lead to the realization of values, rather than those values being artificially constructed by the mind. The authenticity of meaning is rooted in real-world experiences. Quote 176. The spirit is between the I and the thou. It is the reply of the man to his thou, a reply which appears in mystery, which is heart and vital understanding. Buber highlights that the essence of the spirit arises in the space between individuals during meaningful encounters. The spirit is not something separate or abstract, but is created in the dialogue between the I and the thou. This relational dynamic, which he describes as being full of mystery, is where deep understanding and connection occur. The spirit is thus a product of human interaction and dialogue, rather than a detached or individual entity. Quote 177. Creation happens to us, burns itself into us, recasts us in burning. We tremble and are faint. We submit. In this quote, Buber describes creation as an overwhelming experience that transforms individuals. It is not a passive event, but one that deeply affects those who encounter it, reshaping them through its intensity. This portrayal of creation emphasizes the profound impact that experiencing the world and the divine can have on a person, fundamentally altering their sense of self and existence. Buber's language conveys the powerful, almost consuming nature of this encounter. Quote 178. True truth cannot be possessed, even if it is in a sense dependent upon the person. Buber asserts that truth is not something that can be owned or fully controlled by an individual. While a person may play a role in realizing or discovering truth, it is ultimately beyond possession. Truth, in Buber's view, exists in relationships and encounters, rather than as a static or objective entity that can be held or mastered. It requires an openness to experience and connection, resisting any attempt to reduce it to a personal possession. Quote 179. There is the enslavement of man to these demons, seemingly bound in chains but in fact running loose, the reduction of thought to the brain, whereas at one time the whole body could think. Buber critiques the modern reduction of human thought to mere brain activity, arguing that this leads to a fragmented and diminished view of human beings. He contrasts this with an earlier, more holistic understanding of thought, where the whole body was involved in thinking, not just the mind. This reduction strips human beings of their full potential, enslaving them to narrow, mechanistic views of themselves and their capacities, leaving them disconnected from deeper, more integrated ways of knowing. Quote 180. God cannot be located in a system. The God of Abraham is not an idea, but the place where all ideas are destroyed. Buber challenges the attempt to fit God into philosophical systems or intellectual frameworks. For him, God is not a concept to be understood through rational thought, but a living presence encountered in relationship. The God of Abraham, in particular, is not a mere abstraction, but a reality that transcends all human ideas, breaking through the limitations of systems and concepts. This view reflects Buber's belief in the profound personal nature of the divine encounter, which goes beyond the reach of human reasoning. Quote 181. The philosopher is always philosopher in situation, a situation which he brings to awareness. Buber highlights that philosophy is deeply rooted in real-world contexts. A philosopher does not exist in an abstract vacuum, but is always situated within specific circumstances. It is the philosopher's task to bring these circumstances into consciousness and reflect on them. This approach reflects Buber's belief that philosophical thinking must remain grounded in the realities of human experience, addressing the conditions and crises of life. Quote 182. Collectivists and individualists go toward the same abyss. Buber argues that both extreme collectivism and extreme individualism lead to the same destructive outcome. Collectivism erases individual identity in favor of the group, while individualism isolates people from meaningful connections. Both fail to recognize the importance of relationships and dialogue, which are essential for true human existence. Buber advocates for a balanced approach, where individuals maintain their uniqueness while also participating in community and dialogue with others. Quote 183. Speech and deed, language and active engagement with the neighbor. These are the essential media in human relations. Buber emphasizes that communication and action are the foundations of human relationships. It is through speaking and acting with others that people form connections and establish meaningful bonds. Language is not only a tool for conveying information, but a vital element in creating relationships and fostering understanding between individuals. In this way, speech becomes an essential component of building a sense of community and selfhood. Quote 184. In the process of symbolic communication, in the invention and use of language, in the effort of speech, and Buber would add, in the agony and leap of prayer, man becomes or acquires a self. Buber suggests that it is through communication and interaction with others that individuals come to understand themselves. The use of language, whether in everyday conversations or in moments of deep spiritual engagement such as prayer, is central to the formation of personal identity. In speaking, listening, and responding, people discover their own selves within the context of relationships. This shows how Buber links the development of selfhood to the dynamics of dialogue and communication. Quote 185. The form urge in the inner life of each individual is the ultimate fact. Selves make society and are made by society. Yet each self is a unique, unrepeatable person. Buber asserts that individuals are both shaped by society and also contribute to its formation. While humans are social beings, molded by their interactions with others, each person retains their uniqueness. This balance between individuality and social influence reflects Buber's belief in the importance of maintaining one's personal identity while also engaging meaningfully with the larger community. Every self is distinct, but it is through participation in society that people come to realize their uniqueness. Quote 186. Only men who are capable of truly saying thou to one another can truly say we with one another. Buber explains that genuine community can only arise from real, personal relationships between individuals. To say we meaningfully, people must first engage in the I-thou relationship, where they encounter each other as whole beings, not as objects or means to an end. True community is built on these authentic relationships, where individuals respect each other's humanity and create bonds of mutual understanding and trust. Quote 187. The test of your belief or knowledge is that you act upon it. The believer knows out of his own life. In a sense, you know only after the deed. Buber emphasizes that true knowledge or belief is demonstrated through action. One's faith or understanding is not real until it is put into practice. It is through living out one's beliefs and acting in accordance with them that a person truly comes to know their value. This perspective highlights the inseparability of theory and practice in Buber's philosophy, where beliefs must be actively lived out to be fully understood. Quote 188. The highest form of education is this: existential unity. Buber identifies the goal of education as achieving existential unity, where individuals live in harmony with themselves and their values. This form of education goes beyond mere knowledge acquisition. It is about guiding individuals toward a life where their actions and beliefs are aligned. Buber sees this as an ideal that is difficult to achieve in modern times, but it remains the highest aspiration for both educators and students, aiming for an integration of life and learning. Quote 189. God has one truth, the truth, but he has no system. Buber contrasts truth with systems, suggesting that while God embodies truth, it cannot be confined within human-made systems. This reflects Buber's rejection of rigid, systematic thinking in favor of a more dynamic, open-ended approach to understanding reality and the divine. Systems try to categorize and control knowledge, but Buber argues that true understanding, especially of spiritual matters, transcends such frameworks. Truth, in Buber's view, is something that is lived and experienced, not reduced to a theoretical system. Quote 190. The path leads from the world to God, and not the other way around. It leads, ever renewed, from the love of man to the love of God. Buber emphasizes that the journey to God begins in the world, through human relationships and interactions. Love for humanity is the foundation for love of God. This approach insists that spiritual life is not about retreating from the world, but engaging with it fully. For Buber, it is through loving others and participating in the world that individuals come to know and love God, making everyday life the starting point for spiritual growth. Quote 191. Only with all three of these qualities combined can one serve God. The path leads from the world to God, and not the other way around. Buber highlights the need for a balance between prudence, piety, and goodness in serving God. He warns against emphasizing any one of these qualities of the others, as doing so can lead to a distorted or incomplete form of service. For Buber, serving God requires integrating these virtues, with each supporting and enhancing the others. This integrated approach reflects his broader view of life, where spiritual growth is achieved through a harmonious balance of various aspects of character. Quote 192. The sphere between man and man is also the religious sphere. Buber asserts that the space between individuals, where relationships are formed, is inherently religious. Human interactions, therefore, are not just social or ethical, but are imbued with spiritual significance. The way people treat one another is a reflection of their relationship with the divine. For Buber, genuine relationships are the foundation of a true religious life, where love and respect for others are expressions of one's faith and connection with God. Quote 193. The teacher-leader stands in a remarkable cleavage, but one which characterizes the human situation as such. He is not a naive doctrinaire who prefers the untested and untempted purity of the idea to its actualization with its hazards, but he is even less an opportunistic politico who loses from sight and mind the idea on the way to its pseudo-actualization. Buber contrasts two types of leaders, one who remains idealistic but disconnected from reality, and another who sacrifices principles for practical success. He argues that a true teacher-leader must navigate between these extremes, holding on to core ideals while engaging with the complexities and challenges of the real world. This balance reflects the tension in human life between maintaining purity of purpose and dealing with the compromises that come with actualizing those ideals. Quote 194. Trust the world because there is such a man as the teacher. This is the innermost work of educational relationship. While there is such a man, the chaotic cannot be the true truth. Buber emphasizes the role of the teacher as a figure of trust and stability in a chaotic world. The teacher's presence reassures students that despite the confusion and difficulties of life, there is meaning and guidance available. Trust, according to Buber, is the foundation of the educational relationship, and the teacher embodies a sense of order and purpose that counters the disorder students may encounter elsewhere. Quote 195. The child is a part of creation, and not the creator. But he conceives creation not merely passively as it is, but as a human child, he participates in its transformation. Buber describes the child as an active participant in creation. While the child does not create the world, they engage with it in a way that transforms both themselves and their surroundings. This reflects Buber's belief in the innate human drive to shape and change the world, emphasizing that even from a young age, individuals are involved in a dynamic process of creation and transformation. Quote 196. Education bears no politics, not even that which is successfully cloaked. Even if the pupil does not detect it, it falsifies the teacher. Buber insists that education should remain free from political manipulation. Any attempt to impose hidden political agendas on students corrupts the educational process and undermines the teacher's authenticity. For Buber, education must be genuine, focused on developing the character and understanding of the student, rather than serving political ends, whether overt or covert. Quote 197. Only the totality of the teacher, with his whole involuntary existence, affects the totality of the pupil. Here, Buber stresses the importance of the teacher's complete being in the educational process. It is not just the conscious actions or planned lessons that impact students, but the entire presence and nature of the teacher. The teacher's character, values, and authenticity deeply influence the pupil, often beyond the teacher's direct control. This holistic impact highlights the teacher's role as a model of being, not just a dispenser of knowledge. Quote 198. Even conflicts educate. The educator has to exercise pedagogic precaution, and yet, with an objective devotion, wage the fight for truth, with magnanimity in victory, and with loving kindness in defeat. Buber emphasizes that education is not without conflict, but that even in disagreement, there is potential for learning. The teacher must navigate these conflicts carefully, always aiming for the truth. However, in doing so, they must remain generous and humble, whether in victory or defeat. This approach fosters an environment where students can learn from their mistakes and challenges, and where the pursuit of truth remains central to the educational experience. Quote 199. The true victory will be manifested by the fact that the trusting pupil will ask for his advice in his moral dilemmas. Buber suggests that the ultimate success of a teacher is reflected in the ongoing trust of their students. When students return to their teacher for guidance in times of moral difficulty, it shows that the relationship has been built on a solid foundation of trust and respect. This outcome signifies that the teacher's influence extends beyond mere instruction, helping students navigate the complexities of life. Quote 200. Buber believes in eternal values, which he has envisaged. He had listened to the address of the eternal norm, though in the sense of an uncodifiable and inexpressible secret. Buber affirms the existence of eternal values, which transcend specific cultural or historical contexts. These values are not rigid or codified, but are experienced as a profound, ineffable truth that guides human existence. Buber's conception of eternal values reflects his belief in a higher moral order that individuals can connect with through reflection and dialogue, even if these values cannot always be fully articulated. Quote 201. Buber's conception of the line of demarcation belongs to this philosophical tradition, but instead of the Aristotelian doctrine of objective goods of various ethical value, the emphasis is given to the situation in which a certain man is posited at a certain time and place. Buber introduces the idea of the line of demarcation, which builds on philosophical traditions like Aristotle's golden mean. However, Buber shifts the focus from abstract ethical values to the specific situations in which individuals find themselves. He argues that moral decisions must be made in response to the unique context of each situation, with the individual discerning where to draw the line between right and wrong based on their circumstances. This approach emphasizes moral flexibility and personal responsibility in ethical decision-making. Quote 202. The I of I-it has no present, only the past, and by projection or prediction, the future. But the present arises in virtue of the fact that the thou becomes present. Buber emphasizes that in the I-it relationship, individuals engage with the world through past experiences or future expectations, never truly living in the moment. However, when someone enters into an I-thou relationship, the present moment comes alive because of the full, authentic presence of the thou. This highlights Buber's belief in the importance of genuine, direct encounters with others, which transcend time and allow people to experience the immediacy of the present in a way that is otherwise impossible in objectified relationships. Quote 203. The presentness, as the suspension of chronological time, the falling away of time past and time future, is the quality we all seek to invoke in the absence of mutuality and directness as a symbol of the I-thou. Buber argues that when individuals truly engage in the I-thou relationship, they experience a sense of presentness, where time seems to fall away. This suspension of past and future allows for a deep, immediate connection between individuals, free from the constraints of time. Buber sees this presentness as a symbol of the profound, direct encounter that characterizes the I-thou relationship, emphasizing the transformative power of being fully present with another. Quote 204. True meeting cannot occur under a false theory of meeting, and no amount of warmth or spontaneity can provide a substitute for meaning. Buber emphasizes that genuine relationships, or true meetings, require authenticity and meaningful connection. A false understanding of how people relate to one another will prevent genuine encounters from happening. Warmth and spontaneity, while valuable, cannot replace the deeper meaning that must be present in any real connection between people. This reflects Buber's philosophy that authentic relationships are built on truth and mutual respect, not just emotional or superficial interactions. Quote 205. Insight can mean that critical and creative act by which meaning is achieved, or it can be reduced to mere self-expression, by which feelings merely find an outlet. Here, Buber distinguishes between two types of insight. The first is the critical and creative process that leads to the discovery of meaning, which involves reflection and understanding. The second type of insight is merely an expression of feelings, providing emotional release without deeper comprehension. Buber argues that true insight must go beyond simple emotional expression, leading instead to meaningful understanding and personal growth. Quote 206. Every single man is a new thing in the world, and is called upon to fulfill his particularity in this world. Buber asserts that every individual is unique and has a specific role or purpose to fulfill in the world. This uniqueness is not just a matter of difference, but is a calling to realize one's own potential in a way that no one else can. Buber's philosophy emphasizes the importance of individuality, where each person must discover and express their singular contribution to the world, reflecting the value of personal distinctiveness in the broader human community. Quote 207. When we stand stripped of every artifice and prop, we are closest to reality. Buber argues that true reality is encountered when individuals are vulnerable and have shed all illusions or artificial supports. In moments of existential crisis, when people are stripped down to their essence, they come face to face with the most profound aspects of life. This idea aligns with Buber's belief in the importance of authenticity and the rawness of human experience, where reality reveals itself most clearly when one is fully exposed and without pretense. Quote 208. What matters most in the relationship between an I and a thou is that we do not talk about it, but that we live in it. Buber emphasizes that the I-thou relationship is not something to be merely theorized or discussed. It must be lived. This points to the experiential nature of genuine human connections. Buber stresses that authentic relationships are based on presence and action, not just on intellectual understanding or words. To truly engage with another as a thou means to participate fully in the relationship, rather than just analyzing or describing it from a distance. Quote 209. What is probably lacking is involvement, engagement. In his conversation with Buber, the author reflects on Buber's idea that the missing element in public appeals about the dangers of the atom bomb was a lack of personal involvement. Buber suggests that true engagement, commitment at the deepest level, is necessary to inspire action and change. Without this involvement, efforts to address important issues may seem weak or ineffective. This idea reinforces Buber's broader philosophy that genuine commitment is essential for meaningful relationships and societal transformation. Quote 210. For words and feelings are not yet the true being of a person, or what today one would term existence. Buber points out that words and emotions alone do not constitute a person's true being. Authentic existence is revealed through deeper engagement and commitment. He argues that only when a person's words and feelings are fully integrated with their being can they have a meaningful impact on others. This reflects Buber's focus on the need for authenticity and congruence between one's inner self and outward actions in meaningful encounters. Quote 211. If now, when there is a new situation in the world, these weapons appear as one of the greatest dangers threatening us, we must not expect to overcome this peril with a lesser involvement than characterized the original situation out of which it arose. Buber emphasizes that overcoming modern dangers, such as the threat of nuclear weapons, requires the same level of commitment and involvement that was present when these threats were first developed. This highlights the necessity of fully committing to solutions with the same energy and dedication that were applied to creating the problem in the first place. For Buber, only through deep involvement can real change be achieved. Quote 2-12. Physics thus presupposes in a very abstract fashion, even in its fundamental concepts, and in a very massive way in its practical applications, the relationship of human beings to one another. Buber suggests that even in the seemingly impersonal field of physics, human relationships play a critical role. The scientific process, especially in modern collaborative efforts, relies on interaction between people. Buber's point is that all fields, even those like science that focus on the objective world, are deeply interconnected with the social and relational dynamics of human beings. This underscores his belief that human relationships are foundational to all aspects of life. Quote 213. The artist risks exposing subjectivity in its nakedness. While he never provides in his work an exact replica of his inner life, he does bare himself to view unmistakably, and through his work throws himself on the community for acceptance. Buber points out that the artist, in the act of creation, reveals a part of themselves to the world. Although the artwork may not exactly mirror the artist's inner life, it still exposes the essence of their subjectivity. This vulnerability makes the artist reliant on the community for validation and acceptance, often leading to tension, as the community may react negatively to being confronted with such raw emotional and psychological depth. Buber acknowledges the risks involved in this process, but asserts that the artist's creative fidelity requires them to take these risks, making their work an essential contribution to human understanding. Quote 214, "The artist who fulfills his calling to its depths experiences the full questioning power of solitude." Buber describes the artist's path as one that often leads to isolation. By remaining faithful to their creative vision, the artist separates themselves from conventional norms and expectations, which can lead to a sense of solitude. This solitude, however, is not just a physical or emotional state. It is a space where the artist faces profound questions about themselves and their work. Through this questioning, the artist deepens their connection to their craft and brings forth meaningful contributions to both art and society. Quote 215, "What is most important is that the artist's experience of morbidity, of eroticism, of despair and alienation inform his work, become fused into an artistic whole in which the life of man in the world and of man with man appears with genuine power and presence." Buber emphasizes that the darker aspects of human experience, morbidity, despair, alienation, are integral to the artist's work. These emotions and experiences, when authentically engaged with, contribute to the depth and power of the artist's creations. By integrating these elements into their work, the artist can present a holistic and genuine portrayal of human existence, addressing not only individual experience, but also the shared realities of life in community with others. Quote 216, "From the point of view of Buber's thought, this division into objectivist and subjectivist views results from a failure to comprehend the sphere of between, where the person meets what is in the world." Buber critiques the division between objectivist and subjectivist views of beauty, arguing that both perspectives miss the relational aspect of encountering beauty. He suggests that beauty arises in the sphere of between, the space where individuals encounter the world in a meaningful and dialogical way. Beauty, in Buber's philosophy, is not merely an objective quality of things or a subjective emotional response, but something that emerges through the interaction between a person and the world, where both participate in a deeper form of dialogue. Quote 217, "Buber's philosophy of dialogue suggests a clear direction in understanding the nature of beauty. Beauty is the meeting between man and the sensuous presence of something in the world. For Buber, beauty is not an inherent characteristic of an object, nor simply a feeling experienced by the observer. Rather, beauty is the result of a meeting between an individual and something in the world. It is an encounter where the object steps forward with its sensuous presence and the individual is open to receiving it. This dialogical relationship, which mirrors Buber's I-thou philosophy, allows for a fuller and more profound experience of beauty, rooted in presence and connection." Quote 218, "For him, in incomparably higher measure than for the great ruler, the great artist, and the great philosopher, all that is scattered, fleeting, and fragmentary grows together into unity. This unity is his life." Buber emphasizes that in the life of the fulfilling man, everything that is fragmented in ordinary existence comes together into a unified whole. Unlike rulers, artists, or philosophers, who may focus on specific aspects of life, be it governance, art, or thought, the fulfilling man integrates all these elements into a single, harmonious existence. This unity, according to Buber, is the essence of a life lived in true alignment with the divine and human purpose. Quote 219, "The teaching forms itself independently of science and law until it finds its pure fulfillment in a central human life." Buber explains that true teaching exists apart from the realms of science and law. It does not develop through knowledge or command, but reaches its fulfillment when it is embodied in a central human life. This fulfillment means elevating teachings from the realm of the conditional into something unconditioned and whole. Buber suggests that such teaching is not theoretical, but is realized in the actual lived experience of an individual who embodies its truths. Quote 220. To fulfill means, in Palestine as in China, to raise something that has been handed down out of the conditioned into the unconditioned. Here, Buber highlights the universal nature of fulfillment across different cultures, noting that in both Palestine and China, fulfillment means raising something beyond its conditioned, temporal state into something unconditioned and eternal. This transformation is the hallmark of true teaching and living. Buber's view suggests that spiritual and moral teachings must be lived out and transcended to reach their fullest expression. Quote 221. The ruler has his organization of peoples. The artist has his work. The philosopher has his system of ideas. The fulfilling man has only his life. In this quote, Buber contrasts the fulfilling man with other figures of importance, rulers, artists, and philosophers, who are known for their. The fulfilling man, however, has nothing but his life, which he lives in total unity with his purpose. This life itself becomes the ultimate work or expression, beyond any external accomplishments or systems. For Buber, the fulfilling man's existence is his greatest contribution, representing the purest form of teaching and living. Quote 222. His words are elements of this life, each an executor and originator, each inspired by destiny and caught up by destiny. Buber suggests that for the fulfilling man, every word he speaks is deeply connected to his life's purpose and destiny. These words are not separate from his being, but are direct expressions of his lived truth. They are both shaped by his destiny and serve to shape it further. This illustrates Buber's belief that words, when spoken from a place of deep authenticity, carry the power to both reflect and create reality. Quote 223. The artist is that man who has a peculiar way of remaining faithful to what meets him in the world. He seeks its form and realizes this form in a creation or image. Buber suggests that the artist has a unique relationship with the world, one that is defined by a deep faithfulness to what he encounters. This faithfulness involves perceiving the form or essence of things and transforming that perception into artistic creation. The artist's work, then, becomes a way of preserving and expressing the truth of the world as it is encountered, making art a medium for conveying deeper realities through form. Quote 224. Art is one of four human powers that bring man into relation with his world, the others being knowledge, love, and faith. Buber places art on the same level as knowledge, love, and faith, suggesting that it is a vital way through which humans engage with and relate to the world. Art is not just about aesthetic pleasure. It is a profound means of connecting with reality. Through artistic expression, individuals enter into a dialogue with the world, much like they do through intellectual understanding, emotional connection, or spiritual devotion. This highlights the essential role of art in shaping human experience and understanding. Quote 225. The artist, qua artist, perceives the world as figuration, as determinate form that can be brought to the fullness of a completed work. Buber emphasizes that artists view the world through a lens of form and shape, seeing potential in what they encounter that can be developed into a complete artistic expression. This process involves more than just observing. It is about actively engaging with the world to bring out its inherent structure and meaning. For the artist, the world is filled with possibilities waiting to be realized in artistic works that capture the fullness of life and reality. Quote 226. The work of art is a sanctuary for the form which has arisen within a sphere of the sense world or within language. Buber describes the artwork as a protective space, where the form that emerges from sensory experience or language is preserved and expressed. In this sense, art acts as a sanctuary that safeguards the fleeting moments and impressions of life, allowing them to endure beyond their initial occurrence. Art captures and holds on to the deeper meanings that arise in human experience, giving them a lasting presence that can be shared and reflected upon by others. Quote 227. By refusing to allow what meets him in the world to be reduced to merely an object of handling and use, the artist continually leaves the world of it for the world of thou. Buber links the artist's practice to his concept of I-thou relationships, arguing that the artist refuses to objectify the world. Instead, the artist engages with the world as a thou, respecting its presence and essence, rather than treating it as something to be used or manipulated. This approach allows the artist to create works that express a more profound, relational understanding of reality, transcending the objectification that dominates the I-it way of thinking. Quote 228. In the depth of suffering, the return to good is born, and this return it is which evokes redemption. Buber conveys the idea that through deep suffering, individuals can find the pathway back to goodness. This turning point, or return to good, is essential for personal redemption. Suffering is not merely an affliction, but a transformative experience that can lead to moral and spiritual renewal, ultimately bringing about redemption. Quote 229. We expect a theophany of which we know nothing but the place, and the place is called community. Buber stresses the importance of community as the space where divine encounters, or theophanies, occur. He suggests that while we may not know the specifics of how or when such encounters will happen, we can be certain that they will take place within the context of genuine human relationship. Comes the sacred ground where the divine is revealed through the bonds between people. Quote 230. The dialogue relation must not be taken as an absolute. It is limited by two elements, which also are the ones that first make dialogue possible. Buber acknowledges that while dialogue is central to his philosophy, it is not an unlimited or absolute concept. There are boundaries that shape and define dialogue, including the truth one holds and the authority of the divine word. These elements make dialogue possible by providing a foundation for meaningful interaction. Buber's point is that dialogue thrives on the tension between personal belief and the shared search for truth. Quote 231. What Buber clearly has in common with some others influenced by Kierkegaard, and, above all, with Kierkegaard himself, is his impassioned protest against the kind of philosophy to which he and the others are being reduced today by some of their admirers. This quote points to Buber's critique of how his and other existentialist thinkers' ideas are often reduced to rigid philosophical systems. Like Kierkegaard, Buber resists the trend of turning his dynamic, existential thought into academic philosophy. His work focuses on human relationships, dialogue, and authentic existence rather than fitting into a systematic or scholastic framework. This protest highlights Buber's commitment to keeping philosophy connected to lived human experience. Quote 232. Buber, like Kierkegaard, is at heart a religious thinker rather more than a philosopher. His primary concern is not with the elaboration of a system, with the quest for certainty, or the solution of some problems in epistemology or ethics, but what does the religion of my fathers mean to me today? This statement underscores Buber's primary focus on religion and faith rather than abstract philosophical inquiry. His central question revolves around the relevance of his Jewish heritage and religious tradition in the modern world. This focus places Buber more in line with religious existentialism, where the aim is to discover the personal, lived significance of faith in the present day, rather than developing a purely theoretical system of thought. Quote 233. Buber's dialogue is not Socratic. It quite lacks the mordant sarcasm, the frank delight in the opponent's weakness, and the air of a contest. Buber's approach to dialogue is fundamentally different from the Socratic method, which often involves exposing weaknesses in the opponent's arguments. For Buber, dialogue is not a competitive intellectual exercise, but a mutual, heart-to-heart exchange between two people. His dialogues are grounded in empathy, and a desire for authentic human connection rather than in winning debates or outsmarting others. This reflects his broader philosophy of Idhu, where relationships are based on respect and presence. Quote 234. Buber may occasionally seem high-handed in interpretation, but as soon as he confronts a question from another human being, he insists on the achievement of communication, or, as he says, dialogue. Buber's interpretation of texts or ideas may seem assertive or personal, but he prioritizes dialogue when engaging with others. His commitment to communication and mutual understanding is central to his philosophy. Even when strong in his interpretations, Buber remains open to dialogue, reflecting his belief in the importance of genuine, relational interaction rather than simply asserting his own views. Quote 235. Buber is not a model of impartial reading. Nietzsche once spoke of what a man has written with his blood. Buber might be said to read with his blood, or, to use a more conventional term, with his heart. Buber's method of reading and interpreting is highly personal and emotional. He does not approach texts with clinical detachment but engages deeply, often bringing his own experiences and feelings into the interpretation. This approach leads to passionate, sometimes controversial readings, but it also reflects Buber's belief that true understanding comes from involving the whole self, heart, mind, and spirit, in the process of interpretation. Quote 236. Buber tells of the Hasid who, asked what impressed him most about some tzaddik, said how he tied his shoes. One gathers that this tzaddik, like another one I have mentioned, considered most important whatever he happened to be doing. This quote highlights Buber's belief in the significance of everyday actions and their ability to reflect a deeper spiritual awareness. The Hasid's observation that the tzaddik's way of tying his shoes was meaningful underscores the idea that even the smallest, most mundane actions can be infused with purpose and holiness. For Buber, this reflects the broader Hasidic teaching that the divine can be found in all aspects of life, and that attention to the present moment, no matter how ordinary, is crucial in living a life of meaning and spiritual depth. Quote 237. The primary significance of Buber's translation is that he has let the text speak to us again. Here, Buber's translation of the Hebrew Bible is praised for its ability to revitalize the text, allowing it to speak with fresh immediacy to contemporary readers. Buber's goal was not to impose a new interpretation, but to allow the ancient words to resonate with modern sensibilities. By faithfully engaging with the original text, Buber aimed to bring out its living voice, ensuring that it could continue to inspire and challenge readers in the present day, maintaining its relevance across time. Quote 238. What saves Buber's work is its perfection. He has given us one of the great religious books of all time, a work that invites comparison with the great scriptures of mankind. This quote praises Buber's Tales of the Hasidim as a religious text of enduring significance, comparing it to the sacred scriptures of various traditions. The author acknowledges that Buber's work is not just a historical or scholarly collection, but a profound religious contribution that has the power to inspire, guide, and challenge readers in the same way that traditional religious texts do. Buber's ability to capture and preserve the spiritual essence of Hasidic stories elevates his work to the status of timeless religious literature. Quote 239. The text must not be treated as a mere it. The text must become a thou. Buber's philosophy of dialogue extends to his approach to reading and interpreting texts. He warns against treating texts as objects to be analyzed and dissected, the I-it approach, and instead advocates for a more relational engagement with them. To truly understand and connect with a text, one must approach it as a thou, allowing the text to address the reader personally and meaningfully. This reflects Buber's belief in the importance of dialogue and relationship, even in the realm of literature and sacred texts. Quote 240. Buber's current success in the United States is deceptive. One is conscious of his stature. One pays tribute to him, but few have ears for what Buber is saying. This quote expresses concern that while Buber's influence is widely recognized, many people fail to fully grasp or engage with the depth of his message. Buber's ideas may be respected intellectually, but the true essence of his thought, his emphasis on relationship, dialogue, and authentic living, is often overlooked or misunderstood. The author suggests that while Buber is celebrated, his teachings are not being fully appreciated or applied in the way he intended, indicating a gap between recognition and true understanding. Quote 241. The problem is discussed many times whether I am a philosopher or a theologian or something else. The question is rightly raised, for depending on the circumstances, I am to be confronted with the rules and laws of one or the other of these realms. Buber acknowledges the ongoing debate about whether he should be classified as a philosopher, a theologian, or something else entirely. He recognizes that depending on the context, he must engage with the methodologies and rules of either discipline. However, Buber implies that he does not comfortably fit into either category, reflecting his unique approach to integrating philosophy and theology into a more personal and experiential form of thinking. Quote 242. Since, however, I have received no message which might be passed on in such a manner, but have only had the experiences and attained the insights, my communication had to be a philosophical one. Buber emphasizes that his work is rooted in personal experience rather than in traditional messages or teachings. His philosophy emerges from insights gained through lived experiences, which he feels compelled to communicate in philosophical terms. This highlights Buber's deep connection to his own life and his belief in the importance of expressing personal truths through philosophical discourse, rather than relying solely on established doctrines. Quote 243. Reason is included in this kind of experience, only not in its detached autocratic form, but as one of the bearers. In this quote, Buber explains that reason plays a role in his experiences, but it is not the dominant or controlling force. Instead, reason is just one aspect of the broader human capacity to experience reality. This reflects Buber's belief in a more holistic approach to understanding, where reason is integrated with other human faculties, such as emotion, intuition, and spirituality, rather than being elevated above them. Quote 244. But I am absolutely not capable, nor even disposed to teach this or that about God. Buber admits his inability and unwillingness to offer definitive teachings about God. He avoids making theological claims or constructing doctrines about the nature of the divine. Instead, Buber focuses on the human relationship with God and the experiential aspects of faith, underscoring his approach as more about living in relationship with the divine rather than explaining it through systematic theology. Quote 245. It is incumbent upon it to logicize the superlogical, for which the law of contradiction does not hold valid. It is incumbent upon it to hold aloof from the inner contradiction. Buber emphasizes that reason must grapple with experiences that transcend logic, such as religious or mystical experiences. These experiences may not conform to the traditional rules of logic, like the law of non-contradiction, but reason still has a role in expressing them. However, reason must respect the complexity of these experiences without trying to simplify or resolve their inner contradictions. This highlights Buber's belief in the limits of rationality when it comes to matters of faith and the divine. Quote 246. I have no teaching. I only point to something. I point to reality. I point to something in reality that had not or had too little been seen. Buber clarifies that his role is not to offer a fixed doctrine or teaching, but to direct attention to aspects of reality that have been overlooked. He sees himself as a guide, helping others to notice and engage with deeper truths about existence and human relationships. This approach reflects Buber's commitment to experiential learning, where individuals discover truth through their own encounters with the world rather than through dogmatic instruction. Quote 247. The experience for which I witnessed is, naturally, a limited one, but it is not to be understood as a subjective one. I have tested it through my appeal and test it ever anew. Buber acknowledges that his insights are based on personal experience. He rejects the idea that these experiences are merely subjective. These experiences can be tested and validated through dialogue with others. This reflects Buber's philosophy of I-thou, where from relationships and shared experiences rather than being confined to individual subjectivity. Quote 248, I was not permitted to reach out beyond my experience, and I never wished to do so. I witnessed for experience and appealed to experience. Buber emphasizes that his philosophy is grounded in his own experiences. He rejects the idea of speculating beyond what he has personally lived or encountered. His thinking is rooted in the concrete realities of human life, and he encourages others to explore their own experiences as a source of understanding. Buber's appeal to experience reflects his commitment to a philosophy that is deeply connected to the authenticity of lived existence. Quote 249. No system was suitable for what I had to say. Structure was suitable for it. A compact structure, but not one that joined everything together. Buber explains that his ideas do not fit into a rigid philosophical system. Instead, they require a flexible structure that allows for complexity and nuance without forcing all aspects of reality into a unified system. This reflects his view that human life, with its many contradictions and layers, cannot be fully captured by a single theory. Buber's approach leaves room for openness and dialogue, resisting the closure that a strict system would impose. Quote 250. The meeting with men is naturally the first. Nevertheless, one only has to take seriously the insight that the genetically underivable uniqueness of every man presupposes the share of a creative act. Here, Buber acknowledges that human relationships are often the first and most immediate encounters individuals have. However, he also emphasizes that each person's uniqueness is rooted in a divine act of creation. This idea suggests that human individuality is not simply a product of social interaction, but is linked to a deeper, creative force, underscoring Buber's belief in the sacredness of human life and the potential for divine connection. Quote 251. I have no teaching, but I carry on a conversation. Buber once again affirms that his work is not about providing a fixed set of teachings. Instead, he sees himself as engaging in an ongoing dialogue with others. This approach reflects his broader philosophy of I-thou relationships, where meaning is created through genuine dialogue rather than through one-sided instruction. Buber's conversational approach highlights the importance of mutual engagement and the shared search for understanding. Quote 252. No act can be right, Buber teaches us, unless it arises from our bond with God. Where do I teach that? Buber refutes the interpretation that he teaches a strict connection between morality and belief in God. He clarifies that he does not hold the view that a person must believe in God to act morally. This misinterpretation stems from taking his words out of their original context, where he was discussing the relationship between teaching and deeds, specifically within the framework of believing Judaism, not as a general thesis about morality and religion. Quote 253. When a man's speech wishes to show forth reality, obscured reality, it will not be able to avoid the paradoxical expression, insofar as it touches on the reality between us and God. Buber argues that when we attempt to express the reality of our relationship with God, paradoxical language is often necessary. This is because the nature of this relationship transcends ordinary logic and cannot be fully captured by straightforward or logical expressions. He highlights the complexity of the divine-human encounter, where contradictions and paradoxes are inherent to the experience. Quote 254. I cannot accept without qualification von Balthasar's praise of a security of the leading in line that leaves nothing to chance, not even life's play of becoming. Buber responds to the critique that his philosophy leaves no room for spontaneity or life's unpredictability. He acknowledges that he is guided by a task that has overtaken him rather than by pure chance. However, he resists the idea that this guidance excludes the natural unfolding of life's uncertainties. Buber sees himself as led by a command related to his work, but this does not mean his life is rigidly predetermined. Quote 255. I have simply no philosophical view of either the origin or future of the cosmos, and I have never sought to philosophize about beginning or end or the like. I have in these matters nothing other to establish than my faith. Buber explains that he does not engage in metaphysical speculation about the cosmos, its origins, or its destiny. He admits that his perspective on such matters is not philosophical, but based on faith. His belief in the meaningfulness of creation and its completion as a goal transcends traditional philosophical debates about optimism or pessimism regarding the future of the universe. Quote 256. What Rothenstreich names this in me has nothing in common with the postulates that I have remarked on in the philosophy of Feuerbach. Buber distinguishes his own use of postulation from the way Feuerbach uses it in his philosophy. While Feuerbach turns the relationship between I and thou into a postulated concept of God, Buber insists that his own postulates are grounded in actual, lived relationships. Buber's postulation is connected to the necessity of reviving the I-thou relationship in a world that has largely abandoned it. Quote 257. The category of the between, introduced by me in a later phase of my work, is variously called into question, but I do not believe that the human spirit can do without it in the long run. Buber defends his concept of the between, a category essential to his understanding of human relationships. He acknowledges that this idea has faced criticism, but insists that it is a necessary concept for understanding how human beings connect. The between refers to the space of interaction where dialogue and genuine relationships occur, and Buber believes this idea is crucial for capturing the dynamics of human and spiritual encounters. Quote 258. For one can only measure what one might acquire, not what is lost. Buber suggests that while one can evaluate what is gained from an action or decision, it is harder to measure what has been lost. This remark reflects his broader philosophical caution against reductionism or oversimplification, particularly when it comes to understanding relationships or spiritual matters. In Life and Philosophy, Buber emphasizes the importance of recognizing both the seen and unseen consequences of our actions. Quote 259. The direct relation to God is here in no way contested. Its actuality, indeed, is recognized in all that befalls us, hence addresses us, and in all with which we react, hence answer. Buber affirms that the direct relationship between humans and God remains central to his philosophy. He insists that this relationship is ever present in the events and circumstances of life, addressing us in various ways. Buber's view is that God communicates with individuals through the happenings of life, and humans are called to respond to these divine encounters. Quote 260. While I am reproached by Feuerbach because my writings are shot through with the supernatural, Urs von Balthasar asserts that my position is the absolute identity of nature and supernature. In equal contrast to the one as to the other, it must be pointed out that I hold the concept of a supernature to be a false and misleading one. Buber clarifies that he rejects the notion of supernature, a concept suggesting a separate realm above nature that mirrors it structurally. For Buber, what exists above nature is not a different kingdom, but God himself, who transcends both nature and spirit. He believes that God permeates all things and is not bound by the categories we use to understand them. This distinction is important to Buber's view of divine presence, which is immanent within the world rather than existing in a distant, separate realm. Quote 261. I have always guarded myself against the simplification practiced by the dialectical theology that God is wholly other. One may only so name him when in the same breath one knows and confesses that he is the not other, the here, the now, the mine. Buber criticizes the theological view that emphasizes God as entirely transcendent, or wholly other. He argues that while it is true that God is beyond human comprehension, it is equally important to recognize that God is also immanent, present in the here and now, intimately connected to human experience. For Buber, a proper understanding of God must balance transcendence with the immediacy of divine presence in everyday life. Quote 262. My God will not allow to become silent in the mouth of his creature the complaint about the great injustice in the world, and when in an unchanged world his creature yet finds peace, only because God has again granted him his nearness, he confirms him. Buber asserts that God does not demand silence in the face of injustice. Rather, it is natural and necessary for humans to express their complaints about the suffering in the world. Even in the presence of injustice, when an individual feels peace through their nearness to God, it reaffirms their relationship with the divine. This perspective emphasizes that faith is not about passive acceptance, but involves an active struggle with the realities of life while maintaining trust in God's presence. Quote 263. The Confession of Monotheism expresses two certainties in one: that of his uniqueness, no other beside him, and that of his unity, a being, a person, an eternal thou. Buber highlights the dual nature of monotheism in Judaism, which affirms both God's uniqueness and unity. For Buber, these two aspects, the singularity of God and the relationship with God as an eternal thou, are central to Jewish faith. This personal relationship with God, expressed through prayer and communal worship, is the heart of Judaism's spiritual life, and it reflects Buber's broader philosophy of dialogue and relationality. The quote 264. These events do not add themselves to one another, but altogether they cooperate secretly in preparing the coming redemption of the world. Buber speaks about the cumulative nature of human actions and divine interventions which work together over time toward the redemption of the world. He explains that these acts do not simply build one upon another, but cooperate in mysterious ways to bring about future salvation. This reflects Buber's belief in an ongoing process of redemption, where human efforts and divine grace are intertwined, gradually preparing for the ultimate fulfillment of creation. Quote 265. I believe, despite all, in Zion, yet Zion signifies to me no divine security, but a God-given chance. Buber expresses his faith in Zion, but he clarifies that for him, Zion is not a place of guaranteed divine protection. Instead, it represents an opportunity provided by God, an opening for meaningful action and creation. This understanding of Zion emphasizes human responsibility and the need to actively engage with the opportunities presented by God, rather than expecting automatic security or salvation. Quote 266. Friends and opponents reproach me because I neither acknowledge a traditional framework of laws and prescriptions, nor offer a system of ethics of my own. Buber admits that he does not provide a traditional ethical system or subscribe to conventional frameworks of moral law. He believes that moral decisions must be made based on individual circumstances and lived experience, rather than following rigid rules. This approach underscores Buber's emphasis on personal responsibility and the need to respond authentically to each situation, rather than relying on fixed moral codes. Quote 267. Man must expound the eternal values, and, to be sure, with his own life. Buber insists that the eternal values that guide human life must be lived out, not simply discussed or theorized. These values, such as truth, justice, and compassion, are only meaningful when they are embodied in concrete actions. For Buber, the task of each person is to bring these values into the world through their own life, thus giving them real expression and significance. Quote 268. Revelation comes in community. That is not my view at all. Buber clarifies that the idea of revelation coming through community is not his perspective. While communities may play a role in the historical transmission of revelation, Buber emphasizes that the core of revelation is a personal encounter between an individual and transcendence. This highlights his belief in the importance of personal, direct experiences with the divine, rather than viewing revelation as something mediated primarily through communal structures. Quote 269. The insight that for the Jew there is no fixed center of history was expressed from out of Judaism itself. Buber asserts that Judaism does not regard history as having a single, fixed center, like the concept of Heilsgeschichte in Christianity. Instead, Jewish history is seen as an ongoing process without a central historical event that defines its meaning. This view reflects the Jewish understanding of history as continuous and dynamic, with God's involvement manifesting throughout, rather than being focused on one particular moment or event. Quote 270. Hesed is a trustworthiness between the beings and, to be sure, essentially that of the covenant relationship between the liege lord and his vassals. Buber explains the Hebrew word hesed as referring to covenant loyalty, a mutual faithfulness between God and his people. This term is key to understanding the covenantal relationship in the Hebrew Bible, where both God and the people are expected to maintain loyalty and trust. Buber's interpretation of hesed as reciprocal underscores the importance of commitment in the relationship between the divine and humanity. Quote 271. Tehillah signifies just praise. That is, because the redactor responsible for the title of the book evidently wanted to make clear that all these songs, even the complaining one and the begging for salvation, are ultimately to be understood as songs of praise. Buber discusses his choice to translate Tehillim as praisings rather than psalms. He argues that the intention behind the title is to highlight that even the songs expressing sorrow or pleading are ultimately acts of praise, reflecting a deep trust in God. This translation choice emphasizes the overarching theme of gratitude and praise in the Book of Psalms, even in moments of despair. Quote 272. I recognize myself in the thou that is addressed by the commanding of this command, and I recognize my fellowmen, whom I meet on the roads of my life in this same thou. Buber describes his interpretation of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, not as an abstract law, but as a personal address to each individual. The command, thou shalt, is not merely an impersonal rule, but an invitation to engage in a relationship with God and with others. This relational understanding of the commandments highlights Buber's philosophy of I-thou, where ethical behavior arises from recognizing the other as a thou in the context of divine dialogue. Quote 273. The inner dialectic of the Hasidic movement is that between an unoriginal Kabbalism remaining in the realm of spiritual men and a life with the world of unheard-of originality in the way it seized generation after generation of the people. Buber explains that the tension within the Hasidic movement is between the more abstract, mystical Kabbalistic teachings and the vibrant, grounded life of faith that spread through the common people. The originality of Hasidism lies in its ability to integrate spirituality into everyday life, making divine service accessible to all, regardless of their intellectual or spiritual status. This dialectic reflects Hasidism's unique capacity to balance mystical insights with practical, lived devotion. Quote 274. The Baal Shem can also include sin in this teaching of his. In the hour when, on account of sin, you carry out the turning, you raise the sparks that were in it into the upper world. Buber highlights the Baal Shem Tov's teaching that even in sin, there is an opportunity for redemption. When a person sincerely repents, the sparks of holiness present, even in their sinful actions, can be elevated and brought closer to God. This reflects a fundamental aspect of Hasidic spirituality, where every action, whether positive or negative, can contribute to the divine process of redemption when approached with the right intention. Quote 275. Whatever he happened to be doing at the moment, intercourse with God in the lived everyday, the accepting and dedicating of what is happening here and now, is ever again the most important. Buber illustrates that, for the Hasidic masters, the most important spiritual practice is being fully present and dedicated to whatever one is doing at any given moment. This reflects the Hasidic emphasis on bringing holiness into everyday life, where every action can be an opportunity to connect with God. The focus is not on performing grand religious rituals, but on infusing daily activities with spiritual intention. Quote 276. Each action shall take place to heaven. We know from utterances of the Baal Shem conveyed in the I form that he included everything corporeal, without exception, in the sphere of intention. Buber conveys the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, which emphasizes that all actions, no matter how physical or mundane, should be directed toward God. This includes everyday tasks such as eating, working, and interacting with others. By aligning all actions with divine purpose, individuals sanctify their lives and elevate the physical world through their spiritual intentions, embodying the Hasidic vision of bringing God into every aspect of existence. Quote 277. What I have in fact recognized as the great Hasidic contribution to the belief in the redemption of the world is this, that each man can work on its redemption, but none can effect it. Buber identifies one of Hasidism's key contributions to Jewish thought, the idea that every individual has a role to play in the redemption of the world, but no single person can accomplish it alone. Redemption is a collective effort, requiring the contributions of many, and each person's actions can bring the world closer to divine fulfillment. This reflects the communal and participatory nature of Hasidic spirituality, where every individual has a unique but interconnected role in the larger cosmic process. Quote 278. Religion has all kinds of aesthetic refreshments to offer its adherents, whereas God transforms for man even formation and vision in a sacrifice that is offered, to be sure, by a joyful but not by an enjoying heart. Buber distinguishes between the comforts religion provides and the transformative power of an encounter with God. Religion, in his view, can sometimes offer aesthetic or emotional pleasures, while a true relationship with God demands more. It requires sacrifice, joyfully given, but without self-indulgence. This reflects Buber's belief that genuine faith is not about comfort or personal enjoyment, but about a deep, often challenging commitment to live in relationship with the divine. Quote 279. Religion is a reality, rather the reality, namely the whole existence of the real man in the real world of God, an existence that unites all that is partial, or it is a phantom of the covetous human soul. Buber argues that religion must be seen as the entire reality of a person living in the presence of God. True religion integrates every aspect of life into a unified existence in relationship with the divine. If religion fails to do this, it becomes a mere illusion, driven by human desires rather than by an authentic engagement with God. Buber's point is that religion should not be an escape or a set of rituals, but a way of living fully in ultimate reality. Quote 280. The legitimately religious existence of man does not stand in a continuity, but in the genuine acceptance and mastery of a discontinuity. Buber emphasizes that true religious life does not follow a continuous, uninterrupted path. Instead, it involves accepting and navigating the breaks and disruptions inherent in human existence. This discontinuity reflects the tension between the I-thou relationship and the I-it relationship, where moments of connection with God or others are not constant, but must be renewed continually. Mastering this discontinuity is central to living an authentic religious life. Quote 281. The I-thou relation, the grace that appears ever anew in earthly material, does not even grant the appearance of security, and precepts that one merely needs to remember are not to be drawn from it. Buber highlights the ephemeral nature of the I-thou relationship. Unlike religious doctrines that provide a sense of security through fixed precepts, the I-thou relationship is unpredictable and cannot be codified into a set of rules. It is a dynamic and spontaneous encounter that requires openness and presence, rather than reliance on memory or established laws. This reflects Buber's emphasis on the relational and experiential aspects of faith over systematic theology. Quote 282. Religious thought, in the sense in which I have indicated, it means the acceptance of human existence in its factual discontinuity. Only we must give the leadership to the I-thou relation. Buber defines religious thought as the acceptance of life's inherent disruptions and inconsistencies. The key, however, is to prioritize the I-thou relationship, giving it leadership in shaping how we engage with the world and with God. By placing this relationship at the center of existence, individuals can navigate the challenges and uncertainties of life while maintaining a connection to the divine. This underscores Buber's belief in the primacy of dialogue and relationship in religious life. The Philosophy of Martin Buber leaves readers with a profound understanding of the importance of dialogue and the transformative power of authentic human relationships. Through the many essays and Buber's, the book underscores his central belief that the true essence of life and meaning is found in our connections with others, not in isolation or abstraction. Buber's distinction between I-thou and I-it relationships remains a central theme, offering a vision of human life as enriched by meaningful, direct encounters. The text challenges readers to reflect on their own relationships and their capacity for genuine dialogue, urging them toward a life of presence, mutual respect, and spiritual depth.
Curious to dive into the mind of Martin Buber? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of the philosophy of Martin Buber in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.